So here we are, starting the live stream. Okay. So to start off, till we get some people in here. If you're new here watching the replay, we're here every Sunday, so you can come back next week. I'm gonna open comments. A little bit of allergies going on today, so I might sound a little weird, but that's okay. Comments. Okay. See any useful comments to bring up. I've been answering your guys' questions. Still have some to work through. It's probably going to be an ongoing thing. Let's see. Well, one question from a person. I feel it's worth to talk about this question. So in my lesson about the 4D sounds, I talked about how the basic rule for using the flapped D or the tapped D, whatever you want to call it, is that you need a D at the start of an unstressed syllable between two vowel sounds, right? So that could be between words. That's fine if we say what if. Of course, the T will turn into a flap D. There is no such thing as a flap T. So what if, or if we say, for example, better, it'll flap there. So hello, Jonathan. Welcome. Glad to see you. Let me know if you have any questions. But the question was, is today an exception? Because in today, day is the stressed syllable. And this person says day definitely comes at the start of a stressed syllable, but I still hear it flapped. And I have mentioned this before. Somebody asked about this a long time ago, where I might make a little lesson about this. D likes to flap in American English. It's very much a part of that American sound. We like to do that. So the strict rule is, right, unless maybe you're super clearly enunciating or something, it's probably going to be at the start of an unstressed syllable. But the reality seems that when we're speaking a lot more quickly, especially in these like really common words like today or don't, right? Now, if you start, we don't start a word with the flap, so you're never going to say like I don't. No, it's not going to work. But if you say I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, you can flap it. It's technically fine if you're speaking quickly enough. And don't is stress. It's a negative contraction. So, so what I would say is, it is possible to flap the D at the start of a stressed syllable, but only if you're speaking quickly enough. And then there may be a couple exceptions where you don't have to be speaking super fast because they're so common. Like today, I could say today. You hear that? If I say today, let's do it today. Flapping it doesn't sound too bad even at that speed, so it's okay. Looks like we're dead today. That's fun. But that would be my perspective on that. I'll probably clip this out. Actually, I need to write down timestamps so that I can actually go through the live, cut things out later. I'm going to type it here somewhere. Okay. Start, finish, new. Okay. So what was the timestamp here? What are we at? 4 So about 5 minutes. Okay, so flat D into okay. Wendell is here. Welcome. Some important questions of the week. The week. We need the article there. Okay. Fire away. It remains just one question for meeting. What? Okay. So Wendell, before you get ahead of yourself, that first one doesn't really make much sense. I can tell you the first one, the first uh, of those three in the first question is grammatically incorrect and does not work. Just one question is missing for the meeting. That is grammatically correct, but I guess that makes sense in itself. That's okay. Just one question for meeting. That also is grammatically correct, but I can't think of the context where that would fit. And it would not mean exactly the same thing as far as I can think, maybe. Without a clear context, it's kind of hard to answer this one, but for what you're probably trying to say, the second one, just one question is missing for the meeting. That would probably be the answer. Okay. There are a lot of people who are trustful. Those people are sometimes friends or cousins. What? Okay. That dot dot dot. All the family can trust in, or all the family can trust in those. Are both sentences correct or the same meaning? Neither of those are grammatically correct. They don't make any sense. Well, okay. All the family can trust in those. That I guess that does make sense, but I don't have any context. Those does not refer to friends or family. It would refer to something else, completely like a completely different thing. So for what you're probably trying to make it mean, it doesn't mean that, and it doesn't work. All the family can trust in. If you just say all the family can trust in, it's incomplete. You need more information. That's not a finished sentence. Now, if there's something before it and you say that is something all the family can trust in, then it would be fine because that is at the beginning is what they can trust in. So the in goes back to that is. So yeah. Do natives make mistakes about to continue doing versus continue to do? Forget to do versus forget doing, keep going, start going. By mistake, if you mean something that accidentally comes out wrong, sure. Natives make mistakes all the time. But if you mean mistake as in they mean one thing and it was supposed to be the other one, no. No, it's very clear to us, which it depends a bit on the verb, the difference here. Like if you say like doing, like to do, there's no difference. Continue doing, continue to do, there's no difference. But like if I say I stopped tying my shoe or I stopped to tie my shoe, those are two completely different sentences, and we would never get them confused. We would never make a mistake between them. It's like saying, even though the grammar looks so similar, one is just to do and one is doing, and to an English learner it's like, huh, these seem very similar, and with some other verbs they mean the same thing, so I'm not sure. To us it's like two completely different things. It's like they're not even related at all depending on the verb. So if you use like stop doing, stop to do, in our minds, they're not even connected. But if you say continue doing, continue to do, because those mean the same thing, they're just two ways to say the same thing, and they are connected in our mind. Um, anyway, do natives sometimes skip pronouncing the singular third person s or es ending for the present simple? In standard general American English, I would say no. That might be something that happens in some other dialects that aren't general American. Um, if you can give me some examples of that, then maybe I can answer that a little more specifically. But I, uh, right there are some things that you might ask a native speaker, whether they're a teacher or not. That a teacher is just kind of like more likely to be aware of things in some cases. So there's some kinds of questions that if you ask a native, um, we're going to say no, because like we don't think of it that way, we don't perceive it that way, even if it does happen. So it's why it's always good to give like specific examples, um, or some sort of context with this type of question, because then we have something to focus on. If you just say, hey, do you drop this, like, well, we're not supposed to drop it, so nothing's going to come to mind, even if maybe it does happen. So my answer there would be no, never. But um, if you could provide some examples, then I can maybe think about it a bit more. Wendell, why do we sometimes use the and sometimes not? I don't know, mame sapote is. But why do we sometimes use the and sometimes not? Okay, and then you give an example here that has no the. Okay. The answer to this question, I see Delio is here. Welcome, Delio. Got no questions. That's fine. The answer for why do we use the article sometimes and why do we not is because, see, the it's very easy to get caught up in like rules, right? Which rules for the articles are mostly useless because there's literally 7 pages of them, and even if you memorize them, it's not going to help you. The purpose, let me rephrase that. A purpose, not the purpose. It's ironic. So a purpose of an article is dependent on the context. Or put a different way, let's say, for example, right? Let's use a simple example. Okay, that doesn't use the articles, because the articles are very abstract. Let's say I have this pencil. It's a mechanical pencil. Okay. Now let's say this pretend my hand is a table, and I say, okay, put the pencil on the table. Okay. Now, if I want to tell you that, I want to tell you where to put the pencil, and I want it to be on top of the table. Of course, I'm going to use on. I wouldn't say put the pencil at the table, put the pencil in the table, put the pencil around the table, right? I would say on the table. Why? Because on is what I want you to do. It's based on the context, it expresses what I'm trying to express. The trick to the articles is that they express meaning depending on the nuance of the context. They naturally come out of the context. It's not a game of, um, oh, let me choose which one. Should I use the here? Should I not use the here? It's not random. It's always based on the context, the purpose of expression, right? What is it that you want to say? What are you trying to communicate? The articles have a role in that. Sometimes it's the, sometimes it's a, sometimes it's no article. Sometime on rare occasion, there's no difference between those three options. Sometimes there's no difference between the or a. Uh, but many times there is going to be a difference. 15. I just try to keep track of some of the things that I'm answering because I'm going to cut them out. Last live, I tried to cut up, and I was just like, "This is too long. I'm not going to go through and try to get like the points that I made in this." So try to be a little more organized. But anyway, so that's why the articles are tricky because it's not just like, oh, in this particular case, you're supposed to use the. Okay, but why? It's not that there's a rule that says the has to be there. It's that there's in some cases you could maybe say that, like if we say the Himalayas, like the goes before the name. That's just like how English works in that case. So you could say, okay, no, that's just a rule. But generally, it's not just a rule of like, oh, the has to go here. It's what do you want to express, and why do you want to express that? So if you say Mami Sapote has vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber, that in itself is a perfectly fine sentence. You're talking about this food, and you're talking about what it contains. You don't need an article for that. But what if you say the Mami Sapote has vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber? Now it sounds like you're saying, okay, well, there's the Mami Sapote, and then there's other food, right? Let's say pozole. I don't know, whatever. So you have this and you have this, and one has this, the other does not, right? So by using the, you don't even have to say, well, okay, this has this and that does not. You simply say the blank has this, and it's implied that this does not. Okay. So you're using the to specifically point to that one option. That's a natural reason why you might use the. If that's not the context, you wouldn't use the. If you're just making a general statement or description of this food, you don't need the article the. Now, if you say Mami Sapote has the vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber that are needed for the average person, okay. Now we're saying the vitamins, the minerals, the dietary fiber. You don't have to repeat it every time. You just need it for the first item. But the vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber, that, okay, notice we're qualifying it. We're describing, okay, what kinds of vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber. Well, notice the specific vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber that are required for the average person. Okay. I'm just thinking of something off the top of my head here. But now that I'm directing it to a specific qualification, that blah, 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 I would naturally want to use the because there might be vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber that are required for this. And then other vitamins, minerals, or we'll just keep it vitamins, make it simple, other vitamins that are required for this. So now again, just like saying the food and the food, we're saying the vitamins and the vitamins, pointing to two different cases. Um, so you're specifying and limiting, which vitamins, which minerals for a particular case. And so then the becomes very natural because that's what you're trying to express. So again, don't think of these as like rules where you have to use the here, you have to use the there, you have to not use the there. Um, the articles are something that you have to feel. You have to feel them. And I'm going to solve that problem at some point. I don't know when, but I'm going to solve that problem for you guys. I can almost guarantee it. But I'm not there yet. So, yeah, that's a good one. Okay, do I have two? Have to. Where they go together. Do I have to touch the roof of the interesting? Might be a typo, but since there's an SE here, I think maybe there's a listening problem. Mouth. Mouth, roof of the mouth. Roof of the mouse. Mouse is a little animal, right? We did that's not the same. Voiceless th and an s can sound the same, and I think that might be why you typed that. Maybe you're on your phone and it auto corrected. I don't know, but mouse is not the right word there. Just so that's clear. Do I have to touch the roof of the mouth with my tongue to produce the H sound, as in hospital? What? Or have or touch it like in Spanish? Okay, so due to how English generally works, or I guess just due to how I usually tend to focus on things, as soon as I saw roof of the mouth, I was thinking the front of the tongue. And so when you started talking about H, I was like, what? What? The front of the tongue is not used in H? That doesn't make any sense. And then I was like, oh, yeah, okay. So in Spanish, right, the H sound, I think this actually is a useful little point to talk about here. Um, U H Spanish. Um, for some people, I checked in for a bit. Have a good stream. Oh, thanks, Fluent American. Thanks for stopping by. Um, I guess I should pop into your stream at some point, like just to say hi, but I'm so busy. So very busy. It would be nice though. I shouldn't be rude. Um, Especially since you're here like every week. We're all doing things. Yeah, I know. I know. Well, okay. Um, yeah, I'll stop by at some point. I think you're on Saturdays, right? Saturday sometime. You probably have it up on your channel somewhere, but I'll try to remember that. Maybe I'll stop in next week. Um, anyway, so some people would think that this is like splitting hairs, and if we're talking about like just generally sounding okay, it's not the end of the world. You don't have to go down this deep, but if we talk about the reality, we talk about like real practical, like this is actually a practical thing, a perspective of how to look at it. And I think this is one thing. I think the perspective, whether it's grammar, pronunciation, maybe certain skill building, I think it's uh, perspective that is one of the biggest things missing from traditional teaching approaches, because everything tends to be very academic based. Which leaves you guys usually with a very big lack of skill, unfortunately. And what I mean by this in this particular case is, right, if let's say you're a Spanish speaker, you go and you're taking some English classes at like a university or something, and you say, right, so the Spanish H is which is, it's not really an H. H in Spanish is actually silent, right? We know that, but it's the jota sound, right? Like the J in Spanish. Okay, and the closest thing to that, this is where the perspective comes in. The closest thing to that in English would be the what we call the H sound in English because it's represented by the letter H. So it'd be, and I like to call it the voiceless vowel consonant because it basically takes the shape of the vowel after it. So if there's an E, I'm going to say he, right, and then add the voice to go into the E. He. If I do, I don't know, an ah, right? The H is going to be a voiceless ah. And then we add the voice. Ha. Okay. So that's fine, but notice, especially in American English, I can't speak specifically for British English, but in American English, things are very open. The jaw is very open. The throat tends to be quite open and relaxed. Um, we have a lot of space in the mouth especially compared to Spanish. And that's part of the reason why our H sounds more like breathing, where the Spanish H equivalent sound sounds restricted, right? And there's a little bit of a range. I've heard native Spanish speakers say it more like, and some say it more like, right, where there's really that sort of like friction going on. But regardless, in general, it seems in Spanish that there's a little bit of friction to it, and that's because of how the vocal tract is held at the top of the throat, up in the back of the tongue, that whole area there. I've worked with a couple Spanish speakers on the mouth posture so far, and that definitely seems to be a big part of the problem. Once we get them to start kind of opening up back in there and start sort of not pinching the throat up, but sort of letting it relax open a bit, their H's start sounding a lot better. Instead of huh, huh, they'll start sounding like huh, huh, which is good. So, uh, if you take a regular English class, right, and you're a Spanish speaker, and you say, um, hi, hi, right, and let's say your name is Juan, right, which in English we just say Juan. We don't even put an H there. We might say Juan, like put an H in it, but in Spanish, like you might say Juan. My name is Juan, right? So you say, hi, my name is Juan. Okay. Uh, and it's like that's okay, but then you say like, how are you? How. And for communication, obviously, like we don't hear it as a different sound. That's not a sound in English, right? It's not the H sound. This is where the perspective comes in. H is not the H sound in English. It's a completely different sound. It's a similar sound, but it's a completely different sound. Um, Now, if you were trying to sound as native and natural as possible, you know a lot, I guess. No, I sure. It just seems so random. Threw me off. I have I do know quite a lot, I think. I am a teacher. I'm always trying to learn more, but the I think more so than that, I have intuition. But anyway, intuition and experience, um, rather than a database of knowledge. Uh, if you're trying to sound as native and natural as possible, um, the average person, like they're gonna hear you do huh, and they're not gonna question it. They're not gonna say anything. They're gonna be like, okay, yeah, I can understand you. Like, even me as an English teacher, when I interact with, say, someone who's like a Spanish speaker and they have an accent, like I'm not gonna correct them. They make a grammar mistake as long as I can understand them. Like, now if somebody says, hey, I'm trying to practice my English, I would like if you give me, some corrections here and there, then I'll probably give them some corrections. But otherwise, like they're using the language, they're communicating, and nobody's really going to point that out to you. So even in English class, most of the time, especially since pronunciation is not valued very much in language classes, which is like the single biggest mistake in my mind. um, the English teacher, like maybe if you're really thick, like huh, 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 it's like, okay, well, that's a bit too much. Maybe try to, loosen that up a little. But if you're not perfect, they're going to say, yeah, you sound great. Um, but it depends on your goal, right? If you're fine with just being understood, that's fine. You can use the Spanish H all day long. Nobody cares. Like literally nobody cares. That's fine. As long as we can understand you, nobody cares. That's like if I go into Spanish and I say, oh, quiero ir a la playa. It's maybe a little hard to understand in Spanish, but especially if you're from Mexico, you're probably used to it. um, it's a very thick American accent, and it's like, yeah, okay, we get you. We can, you're a little difficult, but you can communicate. That's fine. Where me, like, I would be so embarrassed. I know it doesn't matter, but me personally, from my standard, my interests, I would be so embarrassed if I went up to a Spanish speaker and said "Quiero ir a la playa" or uh, "Quiero queso," or something. Like obviously those are random sentences. I wouldn't go up and say to people anyway, but you get the point. Like with that type of pronunciation. So you coming into English from Spanish in this particular case, Wendell, or whoever it is that's coming into English. Um, you don't have to be embarrassed about your pronunciation. It is what it is. You can always work on it and improve it. But if your goal is, if you have a very high goal of sounding as native and natural as possible, um, then you need to pay very, very close attention to the subtleties because uh, even though things might be similar between languages, um, that doesn't mean they're going to be the same. And that's where a lot of the real that's what often separates sort of the fooling a native from not fooling a native is the little details. Um, so okay, to answer your question specifically, because I know I went off the track there. Um, when so hmm, I don't want to describe this. Now, my Spanish H is probably I don't know if it's perfect or not. I don't know if I'm probably not producing it in the exact same way that a native Spanish speaker would, especially because I never had mouth posture before. Um, so my mouth has always been like way too open. My tongue is sort of out of place for Spanish. So I don't know exactly what like I'm assuming we're talking about the back of the tongue, sort of like maybe touching the top a little bit or something like that to like do or something like that. Um, the way that I do it probably isn't the same, and so it's hard for me to answer this question specifically. But from an English perspective, right, regardless of whatever you do in Spanish, remember American English in particular is going to be more open, which means we're going to have more space back here. Um, so if you say he, okay, now I've actually started to become very very aware because I'm noticing this everywhere, like even in like Japanese and Japanese, English, my own speech, other people's speech. I'm noticing this a lot. Languages that use like a sound for the H. Um, there seems to be sort of a little bit of a range there, almost like two versions where like I can say he, and you just hear that breath, he. But I've also noticed, and I even noticed myself doing this quite frequently, where it's more like instead of it's like there's a little more friction to it. Um, and even if I say ha, maybe ha. That's maybe a bit much. Ha is a good example. Um, but especially for those more closed sounds, like he, um, uh, ha, maybe even ha a little bit. We can actually get maybe a little more friction. It's not going to be like the Spanish H for sure. We're never going to say like he or he or something like that. Uh, but there could be a little bit more tightness to it, a little bit more friction. As long as you can drop into that range where it just kind of sounds like there's a little bit of restriction going on, that would be okay. But preferably, you'd be able to open it a little bit more than that. So there should be, even if your mouth is generally very closed, like say an E, the back of the tongue. The main thing, especially for the posture, we want to keep the space in here, okay, in the middle. Um, so like when I'm doing E, it's a front vowel, so it's up here. The posture is here. The center of gravity shifts forward slightly because we're placing the sound up here, but it's still in the middle of the tongue. And then the back of the tongue could either be up or down. It doesn't particularly matter necessarily. Um, but uh, what was he saying? He completely lost my thought on that. Oh, yeah. So even if it's more closed, like it might be say this close to the top, where in Spanish, maybe it's like this close. It's like there's probably going to be more space. And compared to what you're used to, I mean, in reality, there's not a lot of space in the mouth. Our mouths are very small. But compared to what you're used to feeling and how things usually feel in Spanish, it's probably going to feel like a huge difference. Like you're going this much. Okay. Um, so I would encourage you to try to just open up that space back there. So if you're saying hospital, right? Don't say like ha. Okay, it also depends on sort of how you're holding this. It's almost like it's like the top of your throat is sort of like pinched forward a little bit. You want to sort of like let that relax and open up. So not like ha ha ha. Right, it should sound more like breath. Hospital. Okay. If you say have, don't say like have. No, have. You know, a little bit more space there, less friction. Um, so I would just focus on that. And if you still have trouble, I mean, you can come back. That will probably be touched upon in the mouth posture course at some point, because I want to lay out all the sounds for you guys in the mouth posture course. But I haven't done H. H is actually a sound I keep forgetting about. Um, but I haven't gotten to the point with anybody doing H. Can we acquire language through remembering rules while talking? So basically, you memorize a bunch of grammar rules, and then when you go to do speaking practice, you're trying not to make any mistakes. And so you're trying to remember, okay, so like this rule, this has to go here, and then I have to conjugate that like this, like as you're speaking. Okay. That is sort of what I like to call the traditional approach to speaking, where everybody is so afraid to make a mistake. And I need to write this down. 36 minutes. This I was actually just thinking about this last night before I went to sleep. Yeah, I think about this stuff all the time. Uh, language, philosophy, whatever. Um, uh, what is it? This is accuracy versus automaticity. Accuracy versus automaticity. And we're at about 36 minutes. Okay. Oh boy. So can you? I wouldn't really call it acquiring a language necessarily, but we don't have to split hairs on that. Um, can you? Yes. Um, that is sort of the slow, painful, inefficient way that most people learn how to speak a language. Because they don't want to make any mistakes, and you know they're always trying to be correct and this and that, whatever. And to some extent that's natural. I mean, obviously you're trying to communicate. You don't want to, say it wrong, whatever. Um, but there's two important things, and I talk to my students about this whenever they ask me about improving their speech. I always bring this up. So accuracy versus, um, say, I can't even think today, automaticity. You can also call automaticity like consistency, consistency, or flow. Okay. Um, these are two different things. Now, at the end of the day, they go hand in hand. Your goal, right? Just like in your native language, you have high accuracy, high automaticity. Automaticity, by the way, is it's just that sort of automatic, like the speech just comes out without you having to think very much. But notice those aren't the same thing, right? In your language, you have both of those very high. And so it comes out quickly and correctly, right? Effortlessly, because it's your native language, of course. Um, but people don't realize that there's a difference here, and they sort of confuse the two, right? Where there are people who, like, they don't care if they're perfectly accurate. They want to communicate, right? And I don't mean like in the process of learning. I mean like, say, like there's people who have like moved to the United States, for example. Maybe they're from, like, I don't know, uh Cambodia. I don't know, somewhere in the world that doesn't naturally speak English. um, they come to the United States, for example, and they have broken grammar. Their pronunciation is, good enough to understand, but they have a thick accent, and they don't care. They're perfectly fine with that. They can communicate, right? Like, people can understand them. They can get their point across. So, like, even if I say like me Josh or I Josh, like, it's horrible English. It's completely broken, but you understand exactly what I mean, right? Um, and this is a bit of an extreme case, but uh you can build really good automaticity and like have the language come out pretty effortlessly while having relatively low accuracy. Now, if your accuracy is too low for the language, then people can't understand you very well and your automaticity is pointless. um but you don't have to be, everything doesn't have to be perfectly accurate for people to understand you. Like, we're going to get what you mean based on context a lot of the time. And if you say he go, he go to the store. Okay, sure, that's not right. It sounds bad, but very easy to understand. So, you can practice your accuracy and you can practice your automaticity. What most people do when they're practicing speaking is they focus solely on the accuracy. Okay. Hello, hello from Bangladesh. Welcome, Nazrul. Let me know if you have questions. They focus solely on the accuracy. Now, obviously, they're ultimately trying to get to that automaticity, that flow. And eventually, if you keep going, you will get there. Like as long as you don't give up and you keep practicing regularly, it's going to happen at some point. But it's very slow and painful. Um, what I think is not everybody likes this. I know this isn't ideal. I'm kind of even hesitant to this to some extent, but I do think like sort of maybe a generally better, healthier way, like a faster, less stressful way, is something that like maybe like Benny Lewis does, the Irish polyglot, which I know he's such a controversial figure, even though there's nothing controversial about what he does and he gets results. Um, the fluent in 3 months guy. Uh, so which I don't know all the details. I used to read his blog a lot and watch some of his like language update videos. So what I got out of that is, he says he tries to make like 100 mistakes a day, right? Which most people when they go practice speaking, they're trying to make zero mistakes the entire time, right? Because they're so afraid they don't want to make any mistakes, they don't want to do anything. Where he's like, I want to make 100 mistakes a day. That's a completely different mentality, right? Because he knows that like he's focused on communication. He wants people. He just like he'll which I know he's kind of out of the game. I don't know. I think he might be going back into it, but back when he started his whole fluence in 3 months challenge and all this stuff, he was traveling a lot, and so he would go to a country, and his goal was like, okay, I'm going to spend 3 months here, and I'm gonna just like speak as much as I can with people and try to communicate with them. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about whatever. So he had his accuracy at the beginning is very very low, and he's fine with that. He accepts that because your accuracy is going to be low at the beginning, and if you try to make your accuracy high at the beginning, you have no base, you have no automaticity, you have no flow, you have no familiarity with the language, and so what happens is your speech becomes very slow, very stressful, very painful, right? And the person listening to you, it's also very uncomfortable for them because you're saying, I I like I like to I like going beach. No, the beach. I like going the beach. You finally got your sentence out, all right? Something that should have taken 2 seconds. And as a beginner, that's okay, that shouldn't be judged necessarily, but when you're first starting, you should focus, and I know some people are gonna think this is dangerous and bad advice, but let me finish my idea here, okay? Because I think this is basically what Benny Lewis does, and I think it's brilliant for improving your speaking skills, regardless of if you're starting at the beginning of your language learning or a little later on. It's a really good approach and technique. Uh, what you should do in the beginning is focus on the automaticity, right? And say, okay, maybe I don't know all the words, maybe I don't know all the grammar. There's things that I haven't learned yet. Or maybe there's things that I'm just going to forget because I'm trying to speak and my brain won't find the things because I have that extra pressure of speaking. Be compassionate with yourself. Understand that, okay, I'm not used to speaking. That's why I need to practice speaking. So I'm not going to try to be perfect. Okay. Let me try to communicate what I want to communicate. So instead of trying to say, like, I like going to the beach, you could say, I like beach, right? It's technically a little different than going to the beach, but it's the same basic idea. I like beach. Okay. If you can remember those 3 words, right? Now, maybe if you're a Japanese speaker, you might say, I beach like. Now it's starting to break the fundamental structure of the language where it might be a little hard to understand. That simple sentence we'll still probably be able to figure out. We'll just be like, "Why are you talking like Yoda?" um, so there is some extent where, when you have languages that are subject verb object or subject object verb, you kind of have to straighten that out a little bit. But um, you're just trying to communicate. And then the measure of success is not, did I make no mistakes? The measure of success is, did the other person understand me? That's huge. That's a big shift in mentality. Okay. Then as you practice more, as you learn more, as you listen to the language more, okay? So you're learning some grammar, right? Because I'm not big on grammar rules, but targeting certain grammar at the right time can be super super useful and help you learn faster. You're learning some vocabulary, right? You're trying to use the language. You're listening to other people, especially if they're speaking to you, they're speaking more slowly. You're trying to listen to, okay, what are they saying? How are they saying it? um so, and I'm thinking of, like, from the perspective of a beginner who, like, knows very little or nothing about the language. If you already have pretty good listening skills and your speaking skills are weak, you already have a huge benefit there, right? You should be watching Netflix and, paying attention to the language, how it's actually used. Um, but as you go, as you start speaking more and more and more, you can work on your accuracy. And any teacher, right? I'll make a stand of sorts here. Any teacher of any language who tries to correct every little thing when you're a beginner is a horrible teacher. Absolutely horrible teacher. And the funny thing is, that's what the students usually want, right? You want us to give you every little correction so that you can speak right. But at the beginning, that's not what you need. Okay. Even if you're not a beginner in the language, but you're just not good at speaking yet because you haven't spoken very much, it's still not what you need. Okay. You need to start getting, think of it like a car, right? Like, you're trying to just make the car go from 0 to 60 with no gas, right? Like, you've never driven a car before and you have no gas in it and you want it to go 0 to 60. No, you need to get the car moving first. That's that automaticity or the flow. And then as it's going, right, you can start improving your accuracy. So, what a good teacher will do in terms of grammar is, the lower you are, the fewer corrections you'll get. Now, a good teacher will know the right corrections to make, especially for big points. Um, but the focus is on communication. Can you communicate effectively? Then, as you get better and better and better, the teacher will give you more and more corrections to help you continue to bump up, bump up, bump up as your automaticity also continues to flow along and improve. And then you have sort of this perfect balance where you don't have to worry completely about being perfect, but you still have an eye on improving over time. Okay. Because you're not going to be able to speak like a native straight from day one. It's impossible, right? It's just not going to work. Um, so you have to accept that reality and then find a way to navigate through that. So going back to Wendell's main question here, can we acquire language through remembering rules while talking? Yes. Do I recommend it? I mean, if you want, it's the hard-headed way to get through it. I did that for Spanish. Of course, when I was teaching myself Spanish, I was trying to figure out how to learn a language. Um, I built up a pretty decent Spanish flow for the most part when I was, not rusty. So yeah, but it's very slow and painful. So I recommend that you focus more on automaticity. That doesn't mean just blindly make, whatever mistakes you want all the time. If you have a high accuracy goal, keep an eye on the accuracy, you know. But while you're speaking, focus on the communication, and then later, especially if the person can give you notes or something, that'd be nice. But later, right, just continue to try to improve, try to notice more things, try to, maybe learn some more words. You can practice speaking with yourself as well. And it's just a process where you just work on the accuracy over time, with the main focus always being communication. Um, but again, input is also king there. You want to soak your brain in the language, right? Like you should always be listening, listening, listening. Reading can also be very useful, but listening, 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 just like as much as humanly possible. Um, because that's going to help get the language into you, and you're going to start to figure out what sounds good instead of just what the rule says, right? And then you start feeling it more. So can knowledge like the instructions you're giving us about native likeness, nice, native likeness, obtain or get the same native like competence in non-native speakers? Okay. So if I understand your question, so what I'm telling you about how natives do things, can that give you the ability to seem like a native if you're not a native speaker? That's roughly going to be my translation of your question there, because that's a little rough. But uh, yeah, that's why I'm here. Like, um, now you have to understand, right? It's a high bar, and there's the law of diminishing returns. The closer you get to 100%, the harder it gets. Okay, it's like climbing a big mountain, right? At the beginning, okay, you have lots of energy, you have all this stuff. As you get higher and higher, right, there's less oxygen, you're running out of energy, it takes more and more effort to finally reach that top of the mountain. So um keeping that in mind, I've said it before, I do strongly believe that the average person, right, average means average, so you're probably average. There are people who are below average in linguistic competence, and that's fine. Even within their native language, like language just doesn't seem to work as well with their brain. Not that they can't communicate or anything. It's just it's a weakness they have. We all have weaknesses. I have my own weaknesses. Language happens to be one of my strengths. But I do strongly believe that a lot of people think like, oh, if you're gonna like be fluent in a language, or like especially have like a perfect native accent or native like accent, that like you have to be talented. And that's where I draw a line. I'm like, no, it's available to the average person, um, but it's not easy. It takes work. It takes consistency, whether we're talking grammar, pronunciation, whatever. I actually think getting perfect grammar, well, I guess it kind of depends, actually. I was going to say, I think getting perfect grammar is easier than getting a perfect accent, but that kind of depends. Because using myself as an example, like I seem to have, based on my experience and testing that I've gone through, I do seem to have above average linguistic competence. But because I'm so interested in pronunciation specifically, like if you compare my Spanish grammar to my Spanish pronunciation, like my Spanish pronunciation is like way up here, even though it's not 100% perfect. Um, well, my grammar's not too bad, but I still have trouble with like ser and estar and whatever. So it depends. But anyway, yes, I do think you can. That's why I tell you guys the things I tell you, right? Because I think a lot of teachers sometimes they say, okay, well, this sound is formed this way, blah 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 blah, and like that's fine, but um, I don't think there's too much of an emphasis on. I mean, like good teachers will do this for sure, but I don't think there's too much of an emphasis on like you actually developing that, right? Like it's just like, oh, okay, so this is how it's supposed to be done, and then you try to do it, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's good, right? Um, like especially in like a class, if it's one-on-one, it's usually better. But if you're in like a full-on class, like the teacher just doesn't have the time to address every single person's little tiny pronunciation issues. And so you kind of have to take care of it yourself. And that's a big part of what I'm trying to do. My ultimate goal which I don't think this is completely possible necessarily, but my ultimate goal with this channel is to give every English learner in the world the opportunity to not actually ever need a teacher, including myself. Now, teachers are still very useful, right? Based on your particular experience, your particular case. They can guide you and direct you and answer your questions and do all this stuff. There's always going to be a role for that. But I want this channel to basically like if you want to teach yourself everything and like use, language exchange partners or whatever to like get feedback and practice to where you never actually have to like have a teacher or pay a teacher, that my channel will give you all the tools and resources you need in order to do that. Because I'm very, very big, like I teach myself everything. Um, I'm very, very big on self-learning. And, that's just because, if you like, which I also like classrooms too, believe it or not, not necessarily for languages. I think they're kind of a waste of time, but I like being in a classroom. I like learning things, but I'm very big on teaching myself skills. And if you're not, you like more of a traditional approach, that's fine. But I want to give you that ability to be able to do it yourself if you choose so. So anyway, moving on. Do, 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 do. Okay, so Nazrul, Jonathan. Okay, I think that you become aware when you study phonetics. It's easier to listen. What do you think? Yeah. Um, I'm of two minds here. That's a phrase we have. I'm of two minds here. So I have like two opinions that probably are contradictory. Um, it's kind of similar to my view of grammar, right? Knowing some grammar, like you don't ever have to study grammar. You don't have to. It's not required. You can definitely learn how to communicate without ever studying grammar. You can even potentially reach the point of like having perfect grammar with never studying a single grammar rule. Now, is that the best, easiest, most efficient way to do it? I don't think so. Is it possible? Yes. I think, a little bit of the right grammar at the right time, especially as a beginner, um, is can help you learn a lot faster, help you learn a lot more easily, right? Because you're actually saying, "Oh, okay, this is how the language is." Like if I'm going to Japanese, where it's instead of subject, verb, object, we say "I like cats." Japanese is subject, object, verb. They say "I cats like." That's an important piece of factual information. That makes things a lot easier. If I don't know that, I'm probably going to be really confused, not really understand what's happening. So the same thing with phonetics, right? There's certain key details, and depending on your level and all this stuff, the uh, following the 80-20 principle, there's going to be certain things that at the beginning are super useful and important, and once you get those, there's going to be other things that were less important that now are maybe more important and useful because you already have the bigger things. Um, so learning the right things at the right time, certain key details can be extremely useful, make things easier for you. Um, is it required to study phonetics, even if you want to sound like a native? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And this is one point I was actually going to make a short about this, but I can just cut it out of the live stream. Okay, 5840. So we're going to say 59. 9. Language is alive. But you guys have to understand, a language is not, whether we're talking about phonetics or we're talking about grammar, language is not a static thing that you can describe. That's something, I mean, you can describe things. You can say, okay, well, this happens here and this happens there. And this is this grammar rule. And, this is how you form that sound. And that's all great. But we get too caught up in that. We get too academic with it, where the language is a living, breathing thing. Okay. It has its own personality. I very strongly believe that every language has its own personality that is semi independent of the speakers who speak it. Okay. And just like a person can slowly change over time, languages slowly change over time to where what we speak now at one point was Old English long, long time ago. It's changed quite a lot since then. It's a completely different language, essentially. Um, but even from Shakespeare to now, right? Shakespeare spoke early modern English. Right now, I'm speaking modern English. And Shakespeare spoke quite differently, but that was still classified under modern English, just sort of early modern English. So even in just what is that, like 500-600 years? I don't know. Whenever Shakespeare was alive, um, it's changed, a good deal, good amount. Uh, but you generally don't have to worry about that because you're not going to live, for 500 years. You have to listen to how the language is now, right? What is its current living state, living, breathing state? And that's how natives use it day to day. Um, I'm not just talking about like informal, casual speech. That's obviously important, but like the language is what the language is, right? How do natives get the language? Right. Now, obviously, our babies are a little different, more brain connections. We get to sit around all day being taken care of as we absorb the language. Um, that's a different topic, but the way that you learned your native language was you paid attention, right? You noticed things, right? When you saw this and you heard the word pen or pencil or whatever it was in your native language, it eventually caught on, and you started, playing with your vocal tract and figuring out how to produce the sounds, and started putting grammar together, right? The Chomsky's grammar engine, or whatever. Uh, and so you paid attention to the language because that's all you could do as a baby, right? What are you going to do? You sit around and eat and sleep all day, right? Um, you're literally just paying attention to everything. When we're older, when we're adults, obviously we're busy. We have to do this, we have to do that. But you can still pay attention to the language. And that's the biggest thing. Whether you take an input based approach, an output based approach, I don't care. No matter what you do, I don't care if you study grammar rules and phonetic rules, or if you don't. Uh, at the end of the day, the language is alive. It's there ready for you to listen to, for you to use if you choose, but for you to listen to, for you to read, okay? For you to absorb. It's a living thing. It's not a, just a bunch of rules in some book. It's a communicative tool. Um, so although I think it can be useful to learn, certain rules about this or that phonetically or grammatically, um, I think that no matter what you study, and no matter how much you study, at the end of the day, the main focus should be to pay attention to how the language is used by natives. Okay. And that means, especially for phonetics, it means opening your ears and actually not listening to, oh, well, in this phonetics book, it says this. It's like, okay, that's great. That's a description. Can you actually hear it? Do you actually notice it? Do natives maybe break that rule? Because there's rules that we break all the time. So you want to interact with the language as it is, as a living, breathing thing, um, almost as if you're interacting with another person, right? So I know it's a bit weird, but I think it's a useful perspective, to approach language that way. You're on reason. Thanks. Oh, you're right. Yeah, on reason is a little bit weird, but you're right. Well, thank you. Um, Color or color? Yeah, so the first one is the British spelling, second one is the American spelling. I think in British English, they also, instead of saying color, they say color. I don't know if there's a difference there, but we pronounce color with lur, not lure. So for American English, second one, not the first one. It's actually a common pattern. Like, I think there's like savior, behavior, a lot of like the viewer ones, but then other ones like color and some other things. It's a common spelling pattern where in British English, and I think also in Canadian English, the spelling is OUR, where the American one doesn't use it, only uses the O, right? So it's like it might be OUR like in color, or it might be behavior. Like, yeah, so there's like IOUR in behavior, and we'll just drop the U and just be IOR behavior. Um, but if I can't speak for all Canadians, but what I've learned and heard is apparently in Canadian English, because most Canadians sound American, right? They would generally be under the general American umbrella, and they use the British spelling, but they pronounce it like Americans. That may not be the true for every word, but I heard that's like a sort of a pattern with this particular thing. So Canada is sort of like half British, half American. But I speak Irish. How can I improve my English? Well, I don't know where the question is coming from. Uh, you don't. I speak Irish. So you mean like you're a native speaker of Irish and you're learning English? Because when I hear somebody say that they speak Irish, my first thought is, well, you probably speak Irish and English, because I know like a lot of, maybe there people in Ireland who don't speak English at all. Like, sorry if I'm ignorant about that. I'm just a poor empire or poor American living in the empire here. Um, but I guess that can happen. Kind of threw me off. Same way, it doesn't matter if you speak Irish or Spanish or whatever. You use the same techniques. You could be learning Spanish. It doesn't matter. Um, do the things that I talk about on this channel. I don't have any specific tips for Irish speakers. Just like I don't really have any specific tips for Spanish speakers necessarily. And I don't know anything about Irish. So yeah, but that's cool. Ben from Dublin. Why am I getting all these Irish people now? Irish transport guy, Ben from Dublin. Is this like a pattern now? Okay. Are you a malware virus? Yes. Yes, I am. You found me out. Good job. Can you put my name on your whiteboard, please? No. Why is American English so much different to UK, i.e. Australian English? I.e. What's I.e.? Oh, I guess that would be Irish English. Yeah. That's not one that's usually mentioned. I assume that means Irish English, but I've never seen that abbreviation. It's like UK or Australian maybe, but that's okay. And it's also a variety of English. Well, I mean, I can see where the question is coming from. But I mean, you compare, say, UK English, which UK English, like there's so many dialects. But of course, I mean, if we're thinking about like received pronunciation, proper British English, or whatever, but you compare that to like Australian. I think Australian like kept a lot of the sort of UK sound, but like I mean, they say things differently too. Um, Maybe not as different as American English, I guess, but in terms of pronunciation, I think that's the biggest difference. The grammar, I mean, there's a little bit of vocabulary differences, obviously, like that's even kind of regional across the United States. Some people will use certain words and not others to refer to the same thing. But in terms of grammar, Like the vocabulary is largely the same. I would say like 98% the same. The grammar also would be like 98% the same. Um, one of the biggest differences in American English is if using the past simple doesn't make a significant difference in meaning from the present perfect, that will tend to prefer the past simple, or also with the past perfect. So like if I say like in British English, they'll say I've just come from the store. Where in American English, like I don't know if an American would ever say that, maybe, but we'd probably say like I just instead of I've just, we'll say I just came. So we'll use the simple past, especially in combination with just. It makes it very clear that that sort of like recent connection with the past that should be used for the present perfect. We just like to use the simple past because it's very clear. Um, so I don't know. It's a language. It's a dialect. It's different. I don't know why. Time, distances. Americans are crazy. That's probably part of it too. um, moving on. Delio Hector. Okay, so Delio finally has some more things to say. When I struggle with a given word or sound, I usually put in lots of repetitions, almost as if I were saying a mantra. Okay, doing so triggers brain plasticity, or so I'm told, thus making the sound or sounds I'm trying to acquire automatic and or subconscious. It's boring, but it seems to work. Anyway, what do you make of this? Yeah, so I see FVCC is here. Welcome. Oscar is also here. Welcome. Um, so uh, yeah, so obviously the brain still retains some degree of plasticity. Plasticity. I said that right. Not as much as when we're babies, obviously, like, but still quite a lot, I think. There's some researchers who seem to think like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you have brain plasticity as an adult, but it's like very small. And there seems to be others who are like, yeah, no, it's actually significant. I'm not an expert on the topic. I'm not a neurosurgeon or, neuroscientist, but neurosurgeon, yeah. Uh, but I do, of course, have my thoughts about this. I think the brain is quite flexible, quite plastic, especially with the right tools and techniques for what you're trying to learn, and then putting in consistent effort. But that aside, repeating something like that, I see how that can help sort of increase plasticity or whatever. It's because what your brain, part of how your brain learns is like if something just happens. I mean, it could be something that happens to either just stick in your brain. Sometimes things happen like that, or if there's some sort of like big impact, like it was so amazing or so stressful or whatever, then but it was a one-time thing, then it's probably going to stick in your brain. It's more likely. But for a lot of regular everyday things, like say a particular sound, your brain's like, I don't care. Right now, you might consciously have the desire, like, I want to be able to produce this sound and I want to be able to do it automatically. But the rest of your brain is like, yeah, not interesting. Don't care. Like you even said it's boring. Right. So by repeating something, whether it's pronunciation, grammar, or whatever it is that you're doing for a skill, it could be a different topic, completely programming, music. But when you repeat something like that, you're basically telling your brain, hey, this is important. We should pay attention to this. Get the message. Um, and even then, sometimes the brain doesn't want to cooperate, but that tends to maybe kind of open up a pathway, you know, roughly, loosely speaking, uh, to actually get it in there. Um, so yeah, that makes sense to me. Um, in fact, that's a very natural part of how I develop pronunciation. I do lots of mimicking, shadowing, um, because my ears are generally so good. Which this is really cool. I like to call it. I always forget if I call it ear mapping or mouth mapping. I guess you could use either one, but uh, ear mapping, where your ears get to the point, which I don't know if everybody can develop this necessarily, because I do seem to have some talent here, I guess. But I have more experience than anything. This didn't happen when I first started trying to like, learn pronunciation of a language. But now my ears are at the point where I will watch your recording. Okay, well, thank you. Um, Now my ears are at the point where if I and I this probably isn't true for every sound that a human could make in any language, but usually if say I'm working with a student and we're exploring some sounds and I'm trying to help them find some like anchor points in their language or do some comparisons, and I say like, okay, well, give me a word with this sound, or give me this sound, and they'll do it, and I'll listen, and my ears will map it onto my mouth and into my tongue, and I'll be able to sort of feel what the sound is based off of what I hear. But half the time, I can't get it on the first try because the exact way that I have to manipulate my mouth or vocal tract in general, but especially the tongue, um, the exact way, like either I've never done it before, or there's like certain little subtle muscle that I haven't built up for that particular sound in that language. And so I can't actually physically reproduce it yet, at least not immediately. Usually after like a little bit of practice, just like mimicking the student, let's say 4 or 5 times, I can usually nail it more or less. Um, but the interesting thing is I've actually started to notice that with some of the mouth posture students that they've described to me that as we go further through the course and they're listening to, they're working on more and more sounds, they actually start to feel in their mouths what they should be doing based on what they hear in the recording, the reference recording for the course. And it's amazing. So there's some people who seem to be developing that ability as well. And I think the mouth posture approach is sort of like an accelerator of that skill, building that skill because of the nature of learning the mouth posture and how I'm building up the approach. So it's very interesting. But anyway, yeah, I do stuff like that naturally anyway, and that does seem to help. So that makes sense. Chomsky's grammar engine, that was low key funny, but between us, it actually sounds cooler than a lad. Yeah. Yeah, I can never remember like the specific actual term for it. And so I just call it Chomsky's grammar engine. I think other people call it that too. Like, um, but lad, yeah, language acquisition device. Um, that just makes me think like there's like a little boy from like the 50s with like one of those like those hats that they used to wear commonly, like a newspaper boy on the street had one of those hats selling papers and stuff, and like lad, right? Like he's a young lad. That's usually like in my mind, that's the image. I don't know. I think a lot of native English speakers might have that image, but when I hear the word lad, uh, which is an actual word in English, that's what I think of. So when I think of the lad as language acquisition device, now I imagine a little boy from the 50s in my head, like, churning the grammar or something. But okay, Oscar Martinez, welcome. Or if you're from Spain, Martinez, which is unlikely statistically, but welcome. How is your mouth posture and center of gravity course going? Okay, are you going to release more videos related to it? Good question. So I know it took me a second to get here, Oscar. If you're still here, thank you for being patient. I try to go through everybody in order. Sometimes I get caught up on some things, but yeah, let's address this here. So the mouth posture course is in development. It is still in active development. Um, so for you guys, I released phase 0 and phase 1, which phase 0 is useful even if you're not doing mouth posture. Phase 1 starts building the center of gravity, as you probably know, and then phase 2 starts going into the actual sounds. Now, because there are a lot of sounds, there's many different ways that we could potentially approach this. I wanted to work with people, like actual students, to sort of build that process out, iron out some details, maybe learn some more things that I wasn't aware of. And that has been going very, very well. Obviously, it's been quite a while since I made the last mouth posture video, and I know there's quite a few of you who are waiting for more, which is good. It's a good sign. I'm glad that you guys are interested and eager. Um, I think I'm reaching a point where I might be able to make the next lesson. Part of the reason why it's taken so long is because I think in total, since I started teaching mouth posture, I've had maybe, it's hard to give an accurate number here. I want to say like maybe 15 people or so that I've worked with. And at least a third of those just kind of dropped out, because either they didn't see the value in it, or they just didn't like the approach or whatever, but they just kind of disappeared. Um, of the remaining two-thirds, uh, some of them I've been working with for a while, but they've only been taking like one lesson a week, which I actually don't recommend. I recommend 2 lessons a week, but it seems to be working for them. So they're taking like one lesson a week, and then like sometimes they'll like, it's summer, so some people go on vacation and stuff, and then they'll come back. And then I've had probably about a third of the people that I'm working with, that are relatively new. I haven't been working with them as long, and they've been taking classes a little more frequently. Uh, but I just started working with them, a little while ago, and so uh, of the people who are still in the course, the people that I started working with a while ago, but they're going very slowly through the process. They're at about the same point now that the more recent people that are taking more classes are, and everybody's kind of catching up to the same point more or less. And I've gotten a lot of development, a lot of insights, a lot of ideas. And there's still more that I can explore and stuff, but I think uh, I can more or less safely create the next lesson, which will be phase one, group one. And it has, or it's not phase one, sorry, phase two, group one. Um, Compared to the initial idea that I had for the phases, this phase two, group one, like there weren't even any groups initially, but phase two, group one, the entire approach once you hit phase two has completely radically shifted from my initial idea. And it's so much better than my initial idea. So hopefully I can get the next video out to you guys. But the entire, like, nobody's made it through the whole course. Like if you count, like, no, let me put it, I don't want to say nobody's made it halfway through the course, but nobody's made it halfway through phase two for sure. Um, and there may or may not still be a phase three. It depends on how I break it up. But um, so you might get one new video soon, but you definitely won't get the rest of the course for a while because it's still in active development. And I appreciate you guys' patience. I'm glad that you guys are really interested. But I don't want to rush through and just like throw up a bunch of content that I then, a month later, I'm like, oh, this is now, I've made it so much better, and you guys have the inferior version. Not to say that, once I finish the course that it won't improve, but I want to have something really, really solid that I can be like, hey, this has worked for other people. Um, this is a path that you can follow, and this is the information that you need for that. So I just don't want to rush through it too much. But there will be more videos. As more of the course develops, eventually I'm going to be releasing an entire mouth posture course for you guys 100% free. Even though I should charge for it. Definitely, this is something, if anything, I should charge for. But I'm not going to because I'm not smart. Are you vegan? I am vegan, yes. Why do you ask? Is there something in my room that makes me seem vegan? I don't see anything in the background. Maybe. I don't know if you guys can read any of that. Probably not, but okay. Anyway, yeah, I am vegan. Have been for, I don't even know anymore. It's 2022. I think it was 2018. 2018 or 2017. I want to say 2018. We'll be safe. So it's been about 4 years. Yeah. Um, Abdullah, how can I link a sound to the same sound? T to T. Good to go. Okay. Depends on what sound we're talking about. Let me mark this down. 1.4. So we're gonna go same sound. 125. Okay. Things. So I realize this probably doesn't have to be this close. It depends on the type of sound. We could break this into sort of three groups. I think 3 groups should be sufficient. Yeah. So there'd be vowels. There'd be stop consonants and non-stop consonants. Now, vowels, as I've said before, generally speaking, you can't extend a vowel in English. We don't lengthen our vowels. Now, if you're speaking really quickly or lazily, you can kind of do that. Like if I say go over, I can maybe say gover, 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 if I'm saying it really quickly. But usually we're going to like re-push it out. Go over, go over. Whether we link with a small W or not, I can say go over. That's more enunciated. But vowels aren't really supposed to like extend, right? If we're talking about a non-stop consonant, you just hold it for like a split second. You make it a little longer. Now you have to be careful because, and apparently there are even some teachers who teach this, and it doesn't make any sense to me because I had a question like this before, where like immaculate. Apparently, somebody asked me a question. They said that some other teacher was saying that the M here is longer, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. I would just make it one M, immaculate. It's not immaculate. Maybe if I'm emphasizing or stressing the word, like if I say like it's amazing, there's just one M in amazing. It's the same thing. It's immaculate. Okay. Um, the reality of spelling, if you see two consonants, like we see pass, you see two S's there. Or even if it's like say like the two T's in better, obviously it's a flap D, that's going to be something different. Um, or if you enunciate, you could make it a T, but there's not two T's there, right? There's not two S's in pass. There's not two M's in immaculate. It's just it's spelling. It's spelling. Okay. If, however, you're going between words, and I say like pass some, okay, pass some bread, okay, then you're supposed to extend it. So it's looks like three S's in the spelling, but it's just one S sound plus one S sound. One is supposed to be in one word, one is supposed to be in the other word. And so you just sort of hold it for a little extra second. So pass some, pass some, pass some. Can you pass some bread? Pass some bread. Now it's not significantly longer to where it stands out like pass some. You're going to break the language. You're going to break the rhythm. If I were to make it just one S, pass them, pass them, pass them, instead of pass some, pass them, pass them. Okay, that sounds sort of like pass with a reduced them into so pass them. Now, in real actual speech, this rule doesn't matter too much. Even if you're speaking a little more slowly, if you're enunciating really, really clearly, we'd actually maybe even put a space. Like you can always put a space between if you're really enunciating, like pass some bread. Or you can hold it if you're enunciating, pass some bread. Okay. But if you're not enunciating, if you're in the flow of normal speech, or especially if you're in fast speech, we tend to ignore this and we'll just make it one S or one of whatever consonant it is. So we will say it to where it sounds like pass them, reduced, pass them. So if I say pass some bread, pass some bread, pass some bread, pass some bread, pass some bread. No problem with that. There's no problem. For a stop sound, the way that this is usually described, how I see it described a lot of the time, they describe it as like the same thing, but it's not the same thing. So if I say, bet Tom, so I bet Tom $100 that his sports team would lose. Okay, whatever. Uh, Technically, this could be described as the same thing, that you sort of hold the T, right? So just like in pass and sum, we hold the S. Uh, but because it's a stop sound, how do you hold a stop, right? Because an S, you just that's holding an S. You just keep it going for however much longer than you normally would. But a stop sound, you have to actually like go into the sound, and then you're not producing anything, so you can't like holding a T means stopping a T, right? Instead of actually releasing it. So this is usually put under the same category, but what happens is like you go into the first T, you hold it like as like a stop. So you say bet, and then you push out the second T, Tom, bet Tom. So it's not that there's just one T saying like bet Tom, but there's like a held T that then gets released. So it's like a hold plus release. Um, and that could fit under the same description as like pass sum because you're holding the consonant sound. But I don't think if it works for you, that's fine. Like, there's not a big deal. What I think it's better to classify that um, a little bit differently, because what happens if I say bet Patty? Okay, so there's a P there, which is also a stop sound. Now you could actually shift it. You could say bet Patty and like make it a stop P. You could. That's a common thing that we do. Or you could stop it as a T. That's also perfectly fine. And you say bet Patty, bet Patty, bet Patty. Either way, I'm doing exactly what I would do in bet Tom, even though the next sound is not a T, right? Um, so when we say bet Tom, you could look at it as holding the T, or you could just look at it as, hey, I have two stop sounds next to each other. And the thing that we tend to do very naturally when we have two stop sounds next to each other between two words, the first one will stop, it'll be held. The second one will be pushed out. That's the general rule there. And so it just so happens if it's a T and a T or a P and a P or whatever, that still applies because they're both still stop sounds. So however you want to look at it is fine. But the stop sounds are technically a little different just because of the physical nature of producing a stop sound. And I don't mean like stop as in hold, just like they're classified as stop sounds because you have to stop and then push the air out in order to produce the sound. So that's their linguistic classification. Same thing with g, right? So if I say big game, big game, big game, big game, you just hold it. Okay. Now, if you're speaking quickly, can you skip that rule with the stops, just like you can skip it with, say, pass or pass them? So if I say, I bet Tom $1,000,000, I bet Tom $1,000,000, bet Tom, bet Tom, bet Tom, you can. If you're not speaking really quickly, you're just speaking normal speed, like, I bet Tom $1,000,000, it starts to sound a little weird. But if you're speaking quickly, like fast speed or the sort of the higher end of normal, faster end of normal, then you can still sort of just reduce it down to just one of that, just like you can with, say, the S and pass some. So speed, remember, speed is very important. It allows us to kind of do things that we normally wouldn't. Good. So hopefully that answers that. Delio, oh, that thing of feeling what the sound is based on what you hear is really dope. I have the ability to, but more often than not, I still have to find the sound in my vocal tract, and I can sort of consciously guide myself to it. Yeah, I mean that's the reality. Like once you get enough experience, you start to be able to actually just feel based off what you hear. But if it's a sound that you've never produced before, or if like say it has like a slightly different quality to it, like it's a similar sound in your language, but it's a little different quality, like with rare exception, you're probably not just going to magically like, oh, I heard it and blah, it just comes out, perfectly formed like a native. There's usually a little bit of playing with it and making micro adjustments, which is something that I tell you guys to do. Um, but it's like a good start, right? It's like, oh, okay, so I can feel it's kind of like that. Now let me actually try to produce it, right? So it's a bridge really, between the sound and the production. It's really cool. But great, thanks for your answer. By the way, those videos have been great for me. I started to develop a little more of tongue awareness. Perfect, perfect. That's the goal. That's the goal. Yeah. At this point, guys, like I don't like. There's really no point. Let me actually mark this timestamp here. 135. No point in sounds without phase zero. I mean, like you can obviously not everybody does mouth posture. There are people who have really good or perfect accents that never heard of the concept of mouth posture or whatever. I do think it ends up getting maybe subconsciously built, if you have if you end up developing a perfect accent. It's a theory I have. But that aside, regardless of whether you use mouth posture or you don't use mouth posture, that phase zero work, right? That basic sort of, okay, let's move this part of the tongue. Let's move this part of the tongue. And just getting basic awareness and control over your vocal tract, especially your tongue. To me, at this point, like I cannot go back to teaching pronunciation the way I used to teach it. Um, let's say theoretically at some point, if because right now I'm just teaching mouth posture, especially because I'm trying to develop the course. I need as much time on that as I can. But let's say I develop the course and I go back to, okay, like you can choose the mouth posture approach or you can choose, the not mouth posture approach. And I'm working with somebody, even if I go back to teaching without mouth posture, or I have that as an option, I will still make that person go through phase zero. Like if you're going to work with me, you have to do phase zero, period. Like it's either you don't work with me or you do phase zero. Okay. Because I don't think there's any point based on what I now know. And based on my current experience, I don't think there's any point at all trying to learn pronunciation. Like listening is one thing. You can do minimal pairs and stuff. That's always great. But like actually trying to like figure out what to do with your tongue, I think there's no point in that if you don't have basic vocal tract awareness. Like, and that's where the sort of the talent kind of starts to come into play for a lot of people. Where if you are naturally talented, naturally interested, you tend to spend more time with it. Maybe you are a little bit above average with it, then yeah, you're probably going to be able to you're going to end up developing a lot of the techniques and stuff naturally that would get you to that point just because you want to spend time with it. Where the average person, maybe they're like, they want to sound better, they want to maybe even sound native, but they're not so interested or so uh, naturally inclined to it that they're going to naturally discover those things for themselves and build those, like figure out how to move their tongue in those subtle ways. um, and phase zero is really sort of a way for me to formalize and standardize my natural ability, like what I naturally do with languages, and try to give it to the average person of like, hey, here's a very basic vocal tract awareness and controlled development program that you can use to start developing the basic skills that you need in order to get the sounds. Like that's its whole purpose. So, and at some point I want to make some improvements to phase zero, but I've had like every single person that I've worked with, they hate phase zero. Everybody hates phase zero. And I understand. I get it. I get it. It's the Miyagi element. That's what I've talked about a couple times before. The Miyagi element is that central focal point at the bottom of the skill development pyramid for any skill, programming, art, language, music, it doesn't matter. That is either so obvious that you don't notice it, or it's so seems so simple that you don't even bother with it. And it has to do with building up basic physical, mechanical competency that doesn't seem directly related to that thing. So the core foundation of spoken language obviously is pronunciation, it's sounds, which combine into syllables, which combine into words, which combine into phrases, et cetera, et cetera. But it comes down to sound, right? We're using sound to communicate. So if we go and we say, okay, well, how do we produce the sounds better? Well, there happens to be this thing called mouth posture, which is a glue. Even if we ignore the mouth posture, how do we produce the sounds? Okay. Well, I call it the Miyagi element because Mr. Miyagi in the Karate Kid, the original Karate Kid from 1980s. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. It's great. If you saw the more recent Karate Kid with Jackie Chan and Jaden Smith, I think it's Jaden Smith, they used a similar type of thing, but it was a different setup. Where Mr. Miyagi didn't want to teach Daniel in the original Karate Kid. He didn't want to teach him karate. But he saw that he was struggling and having difficulty with bullies and stuff. And he's like, okay, fine, I'll teach you. And so he's like, all right, yeah, let's learn karate. And he's like, okay, first thing I want you to do, wax my car. Nothing to do with karate, right? It's like, how is that related at all? And it's not, to be fair, that particular thing is not. But he said, okay, you're going to wax my car. So he starts waxing the car and he's doing this on the car, right? Like on the hood. He's just like going crazy. And Mr. Miyagi says, no, 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 no. Wax on, wax off. Okay. It's a specific motion. Okay. And then he said, okay, now you're going to paint my house. And he's like, oh, okay, fine. I'll paint your house. But then you're going to teach me karate, right? And he's like, yes, yes, yes. Okay. So he starts painting the house, right, with the paintbrush. And I was like, no, 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 no. Like this, right? It's a very specific motion. Now, when he's waxing the car every day and he's painting the house, he's repeating this mechanical motion over and over and over and over again, these different motions, right? And then one day, Daniel goes to Mr. Miyagi and he's tired of it. He's like, I'm not going to do your chores anymore. You're not teaching me karate. That's what I'm here for. And so finally, right, he says, Daniel-san, show me wax on. And then he tries to punch him. And what does Daniel do? He blocks. Oh, look, wax on, wax off. Right. And then this was also a thing, for whatever. So the point is that he was teaching him the underlying basic mechanical muscle memory for the basics of blocking and different things that he would need before he even started actually learning karate. That's the kind of approach that I want to take to skill development. And when I get back to my second channel in the future, I'm going to be applying that to many different skills in one way or another. But for language, for pronunciation, here specifically for English, that's really what I'm doing with phase 0 and with the mouth posture course is obviously with this, like you're not waxing a car. Like you obviously, if you're manipulating your vocal tract, that in some way that's going to be beneficial to pronunciation. So that seems true. But everybody that has gone through phase 0, as we were like, okay, move your throat in 4 different directions, move the back of your tongue in 4 different directions, and do it in a way that's nice and clean and clear that only has that part. Pretty much everybody, they're like, yeah, I can see how maybe that's going to be useful, but I kind of feel like I'm just wasting my time. Like, why bother? Blah, blah, blah. And then at the same time, almost everybody who gets to phase 2, where we start actually building the sounds, especially if they've been trying to improve their pronunciation for, say, 2, 3, 4 years, they get to phase 2 and they're like, oh, it all makes sense. Now I know why we did phase 0. Just like in the Karate Kid, right? Once Mr. Miyagi starts attacking him and he's able to block and able to respond automatically, he starts to get it. Oh, that's what you were training me to do. Okay. So yeah, that's the that's the thing. So I have to tell people it sucks because I hate doing this. Like I don't like, usually I don't tell people to just like blindly trust other people, right? Like I don't think that in life that's a bad policy. Like you should think for yourself. But when it comes to some things like this, like you're coming to me to improve your language skills, right? And I'm saying, hey, have a little trust in the process and just stay with me here. Go through, jump through these hoops, okay? And it's going to make sense. And the people who stick around long enough start seeing the results. Those who don't, well, they don't get the results. But it's not for everybody, of course. Like everything works, but not everything works for everybody. So that I also understand that. That's fine. But I'm glad that it's been working for you, Oscar. It's fantastic. Nazrul, what is here in a song? All right, listen to some country music. I love it. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Luke Bryan, but he has some good songs. I don't think that is what he said though, because that doesn't quite make sense. Maybe he did. Let's see here. What was the name of the song? I think, yeah, I think you probably heard honky tonk. Maybe he turned tonk into more of an adjective, which we don't usually do, but you could like honky tonky. Could you give me the exact? If you could give me the exact song, preferably with a timestamp, but at least the song, I can look it up and be sure. But yeah, it's probably honky tonk. So honky is. It's funny because since I'm white, I feel like I don't have any resistance to say that, but I could still get demonetized for saying it. Potentially, honky is a potentially racist term against white people, particularly Southern white people. But it's a honky tonk is like, I don't know how to describe that. Like it's I guess it's essentially like a bar, like a dance bar kind of, where like you can go, you can drink, you can, have a good time, like just like a bunch of Southern white people, go like, I've never actually been to one because I've never been to the South. So it's outside of my experience, but that's what I understand of it. But it's a fairly common thing that you'll hear in country music. So yeah. Alan is here. Welcome, Alan. Sorry, it took me a second to acknowledge your existence. DM, I guess it's a typo. Do you feel a vowel? Better work on the spelling a little bit. Random capitalized A. Interesting, but yeah, okay. Do you feel a vowel? So British is British, extra H in there, is similar to cot. Oh, I see. Okay, so the way that I was interpreting this, I thought A was the article A and you just happened to capitalize it. That really threw me off. So you'd have to say the A vowel and then maybe even put A in parentheses possibly, just to make it clear in the flow of the text here. But because it's that specific vowel, so like the E vowel, the I vowel, the E vowel. Now, when you say A vowel, that makes no sense because the letter A commonly represents a, ah. If we're talking about it not with the cot merger, it could be ah or aw, could be both of those. So A is used to represent a lot of sounds. But because you're saying similar to the cot vowel in your accent, I assume that you're talking about something related to ah and aw. I'm not an expert on British English. My understanding is that actually, here's a fun little fact for you. I don't know if you saw my neutral accent lesson, how there's more than one neutral accent in American English, but the standardized neutral pronunciation of American English that most teachers teach, including the vowel chart, like the standard general American vowel chart, is there was this one guy who he based it partially off of British English and mixed it with like I think it was the prestige variety of American English at the time, like back in the 50s. And so it's actually the pronunciation that like the standard pronunciation that you guys are taught for American English is actually not an accent that any native speaker of American English naturally speaks, um, which is one of the most ridiculous things to me. It still sounds neutral. It still sounds great. It still sounds American. Like nobody's gonna think that it sounds weird or stands out in any way. Um, but it's partially created rather than organic. Um, and when we talk about the British, like this whole cot merger in British English, um, so at that time, I don't know how popular the cot merger was. It might not have been around, or it might have been very early, more of a regional thing at the time. Now the cot merger is becoming the standard across the country, even though it's not quite recognized as such by many teachers yet. Like you even have Rachel's English who uses the cot merger in her native speech, and yet she doesn't teach it, which I think is also just ridiculous. That's like if not already, at some point, the majority of Americans are going to be using the cot merger, and so it's like, why would you teach the old way when most people either are or will be using the merger, and it's easier to learn English to like for your pronunciation, you don't have to learn two different sounds. It just does, it makes no sense to me. But I think there definitely are Americans who still use the unmerged vowels. In British English, obviously the British mouth posture is a little bit different, but and I think that their awe is like a bit more rounded and exaggerated than the American one. But for Americans who don't have the merger, that's going to roughly match British English. It's going to be roughly the same. So to answer your question, the British would match the unmerged cot. So the answer to your question would be no. The cot merger is literally just the sound is back here. It's on the back of the tongue, back here, down here. No lip rounding. British people don't do that, as far as I know, especially in RP. RP does not do that. Now, maybe it's something that isn't really talked about in the literature that I've seen. Maybe the reality of everyday RP speakers is that it's also happening in British English, not just American English. I don't know. As I said, I'm not an expert on British English. I don't know what's changing in every dialect around the world, or maybe what has changed compared to what's taught. So, yeah, but I would say no. It's going to be closer to the unmerged, or it's going to be the same as the unmerged. No, it's not going to be the merged. Peter, welcome. I would need you to send me the English description method on my mail. I have no idea. You mean the phonetic transcription method? Because I don't want the edit part. Does this work? Should work. Okay. This link should work. Now, Peter, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, but you've had several comments trying to get me to send you an email, even though my email is listed publicly on the About section on the desktop version. It doesn't seem to be on there on the mobile version for some reason, but on the desktop version, on the about section of my page, my channel, you can find my email address, and you keep asking me to email you or to message you in some way. And as I've said before, I'm not going to do that. I don't do that. I'm not in the business of going around messaging every single person who asks me to email them. And it actually, again, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, but it kind of seems a little suspicious. So yeah, if you're asking about the phonetic transcription method, that link should work. And there you go. But looks like we caught up. Yay. Okay. Any other questions, guys? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 7 timestamps of things that I can cut out from the live stream, make my life a little easier. So that's nice. Oh, I'm tired. Things. So much. I always have so much work to do. Let's see. That's a little odd. Okay. Nothing else, guys? Nothing else? So who here, aside from Nazrul, listens to country music? Which, by the way, country music, of course, is going to be a Southern accent. At least 9 times out of 10. Keep that in mind. It's not general American. But it's great music. A lot of Americans hate country music. It's like there's certain stereotypes that are like, it's like lame, but a bit. So, okay, Delio. If I remember, I know you're either a Spanish or Portuguese speaker. I want to say Portuguese. Yes. Could be wrong. I think it's Portuguese. I'll wait for you to respond to that. But yeah, like I love country music. My grandma listens to country music, and so I grew up listening to it. That might be one reason why I like it. A lot of country music these days is like, it's kind of too pop, and it's just like it's not really country anymore. With the exception of, say, Luke Combs, Aaron Lewis, who used to be the lead singer of Stained. He does country music now, which I think is fantastic. He sings sort of more the outlaw country version of a little classical country. So anyway, Portuguese, yeah. So then, Delia, do you listen to like Taylor Swift? Yeah, yeah. Taylor Swift started country. Like her first album was pretty country sounding for the most part. It was a bit popish, but then she just went complete. Like she left country. It was just this transition where it's just like, nope. Now she's just pop. I liked some of her early songs, but yeah, it was crazy because we had like, at the time we had 2 country stations here in San Diego, which whenever I tell a Southerner that we have 2 country stations in San Diego, they're like always shocked. They're like, "What? Like you listen to country music out here?" It's like, yeah, we have concerts and everything. Now we only have 1, as far as I know, but we had 2 country radio stations out here at the time, and there was a period of time when Taylor Swift was like so popular. Like I think it was like at the height of her popularity shortly before she shifted fully into pop music. And both country stations, like you pretty much almost all day, like it was just Taylor Swift songs, like almost nothing but Taylor Swift songs for like 2 weeks. And I was just like, "Oh my god, I need to, like, listen to a different station because even though some of these songs are pretty good, I am getting tired of listening to this." So, yeah. Um, yeah, she betrayed us. Yeah. Well, people do what they do. That's okay. I like a couple of her pop songs too. I'm not too big on pop, but things sound good. They're called pop for a reason. And some pop songs I like the beat too. Like what's that one song she has? Shake It Off, I think. I like Shake It Off. But anyway, Delio, so I assume if you listen to a bit of country music, you probably, in Portuguese, you probably listen to Paula Fernandes. I can't say her name anymore. My Portuguese is so bad, so rusty. Fernandes. Fernandes. Yes? Something like that. Paula Fernandez. Let's be a gringo. Because I don't listen to a whole lot of Portuguese music since I don't understand a lot of the spoken language. But as you know, I love the sound of Portuguese, and I'll listen to her. She's in one of my I have a big main playlist on Spotify that just has Japanese music, Spanish music, German music, Portuguese music, and then of course a bunch of different types of English music, which is all in one big thing. And I have, I think, 2 of her albums on that playlist. So especially Pássaro de Fogo. That's a really good one. I used to, but her lyrics are too lame for the most part. Too many weird metaphors. I don't know if I could understand it more. I might like that. I love metaphors. But yeah, I don't know. And then she did that what is it, that duet with Shania Twain, whereas she was singing in Portuguese and Shania Twain was singing in English. That was a really cool one. But 90s country. That, I mean, I grew up in the 90s, so that might be why. But 90s country is where it's at. Were there movies accent in old movies? That is a bit what? Accent in 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I don't quite understand the question. Were there movies accent in old movies? You mean so because I mentioned say back from the 50s and stuff? Did they also use that accent in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in movies and stuff? Is that the question? Finn is here. Welcome, Finn. I answered a question. I think I answered a question of yours, Finn. But I couldn't find you for some reason. I don't know if you're a private subscriber, because I know you can do that. But I was looking for you in my comment history because I was gonna tag you or something, and you just don't pop up in the search results of my comments. I'm just why? Where? What is going on? But anyway, I hear a unique accent that is not used anymore. Yeah, that's probably that sort of movie type accent that because so in the media, right, this sort of semi-fake neutral accent that you guys are generally taught, that still sounds really great and perfectly American. If say Stephen Colbert is a really good example. So he's from Texas, and originally he doesn't speak with a general American accent. He has more of a Texas accent. And he, before he was on the Jon Stewart show and eventually had his own show and stuff, he went through accent reduction training to learn how to speak that way. That's sort of like the media, yeah, transatlantic accent. Yeah, that's it. Um, that used to be considered like the standard, and I guess it still is for some stupid reason. um, and again, that goes back to the whole thing where there's more than one neutral accent, and the fact that like there's just one that's taught as the neutral accent. It's just misleading and confusing for you guys. And then I say, hey, there's this caught merger thing, and you're like, yeah, but isn't that not standard accent? It's like, no, this is nonsense. uh but anyway, yeah, it's like if I watch a movie from the 50s, like to me they'll sound American. Like it's like, yeah, that's American, but there's a certain thing to it where it's like it feels dated. um and I think like what you're taught now is not completely that, um but it's based on that. And it is what it is, but I don't see the point in it. But it's good that you hear that, because that means your ears are working. So yeah, I would ignore it. um it's I mean, unless you want to talk that way. But I would ignore it. uh That's weird. I just subscribed normally. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Whatever. Um, okay. So deal. Yeah, I cut my teeth on some of those 90s country songs growing up, be it a whole decade later. That's okay. It's okay. I still listen to them now. So yeah. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the expression "cut my teeth," no, he did not actually cut his teeth. That's an expression we have. Um, Wendell, there are lots of people who are trustful. Those people are sometimes friends or cousins. Okay, so this goes back to a previous question you answered. No, it's if you say like all the family can trust. If you say he's someone who all the family can trust, that's fine. But again, this is a fragment. It just saying all the family can trust in those, or all the family can trust in those, are fragments. They don't work by themselves. So if you drop in those, it's all the family can trust. That's still a fragment. It doesn't work. You need a context, something that it refers to. But yes, potentially you could drop in those. Does the phrase "cut my teeth on" make sense there? Yeah. No, that didn't stand out as weird. It stood out to me because you're an English learner, and I was like, wow, he knows the phrase. Nice. But it wasn't weird for the context. I assume you're using it correctly. Sounds like it's correct. Sometimes that happens where like you'll use a phrase and you meant something a little different because you thought that it meant something a little different than it actually does. But probably that's usually not the case. So like get started on or with, or sort of like, yeah, like when you got into it, that was your first sort of big exposure to it, or big attempt at something. We don't even think about how it worked. We didn't even think about how it worked. Both can sound quite similar in fat speech. Fast speech. Yeah, good correction. We didn't think about how it worked. 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 Can we give you the really fast, lazy, down and dirty native version? I'm going to say those first three words. for don't, and then the first 3 words for didn't. And when you listen very carefully, we don't even. Okay, so I'm going to stick on don't for a second. Okay, so this is don't. We don't even. 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 This is super fast, super lazy. Okay, this is where some things are kind of breaking, like the D. But we don't even. 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 Okay. Now with didn't. We didn't even. 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 We don't even. We don't even. We didn't even. We didn't even. We don't even. We don't even. We didn't even. We didn't even. So you are correct. They can sound quite similar, yes. But I highly doubt, even at that speed with that laziness, I highly doubt that a native would mix those up. Like I could say it exactly that way to any native, and they would probably know if it's present or past. That's because there's a key difference. Now, if I were just to isolate and say we didn't even, just like that, without like a greater context, maybe I confuse someone. Maybe I might confuse someone, but even then, I don't think that there would be much difficulty for a native. The key difference is obviously the vowel. So when I'm saying don't, I say it really quickly and lazily, especially with the E before the D. I'm like very, very lightly, quickly tapping the D. I'm doing a nasal O. I'm not even bothering to go into the N. See, we don't even. I'm not even doing a T of any kind. I'm not stopping it. I'm not pushing it out. So the T is gone. The N is gone. I'm going from nasal O or partially nasal O into E for even. So we basically have E, flap D, partial nasal O, E. Okay, like iroi, 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 iroi. I'm not even nasalizing the O there. Hold on. Oh, I didn't even imagine there's an N after it. I just don't pronounce the N. Iroi, yeah, iroi, 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 wiroin, wiroin, iroi, iroi. You can hear, nah, iroi, iroi, iroi. And so it's that little, it's that oh, 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 instead of wide, wide, widow, widow, wide, we didn't even. Now in didn't, I'm doing something very, very similar where, again, I'm just flapping that first D really quickly. I'm nasalizing the dropping the second D, dropping the N, dropping the T. Okay. So what happens then, again, this is very fast. This is very lazy. This is broken. The pronunciation is broken because of the speed and extreme laziness. But this is that special world of super fast speech that is crazy. But that does exist. The only real difference at that speed and laziness between don't and didn't is the vowel. That's it. It's just a flap D and a nasal vowel, and the nasal vowel is either O or I. That's it. That's very loud playing, but that's how natives can speak super fast. So when you guys, like, obviously most of you guys aren't trying to speak that fast. You don't have to ever speak that fast, but when you guys are like, hey, I have difficulty pronouncing this group of sounds. Well, the faster you go, the more difficult it is to hit every single sound. And so we tend to start dropping things. And then in that really, really fast range, things that would never be possible to drop in normal speech, even in fast normal speech, super fast will start to drop even more. So that's why I say it's its own little world. Like, in fact, I could probably, like, I don't even know how I would do it, but I could probably have like an entire course just on like super fast speech and things that break and stuff. But I'm probably never going to make that for various reasons. I don't think it's really necessary at the end of the day. Just like pay attention to the language. You never have to speak that fast. Just know that it exists, and you know, uh, just go with it. I think it was popular back then in the old movies. According to Google, it's called translator. I guess. Yeah, exactly. Wonder why it vanished. Did it vanish? Oh, I still see it. I don't know if it's not showing for you. Anyway. Oh, you're talking about the accent. I thought you were talking about the comment. I don't know. Whatever. Yeah. So, I feel like I would say something like we own even and weed and even. That's another thing that can happen actually. Yeah, you can say weed and even. So just like garden, where you do that sort of nasal plosive D into N. Mm, mm, weed and even. That's one way to do it. Yeah. Um, because the really fast speech like breaks things farther. It's not like, oh, this is now what you have to do necessarily, because remember there's always a range, so it gives us like more possibilities. Some of the fully enunciated possibilities are probably going to disappear in the super fast speech because it's like we're shifting everything over, but a lot of the regular possibilities will still exist in really fast speech. But if you're trying to go as fast as possible, you need to be dropping as much as possible. So like really what's the most important thing in don't? Well, we need the D, right? In some way, even if it's just lightly flapped. And then we need a vowel. Otherwise it's just a D. Like as long as you partially nasalize the vowel, you don't need the N, you don't need the T. Like we know that there's the N there, and we'll know from context and from grammar like that it's going to be don't. It's going to be negative. And then didn't, okay, past tense. Still, all you really need is a D and a nasalized vowel. But because the vowel is different, we know that it's past because using I instead of O. So that's like the most extreme case. So anyway, well, probably about time to go, I think, unless there's any last minute questions. Anything else to talk about here? I do have a little update of sorts. So the range concept, or the range lessons, I was going to make it into like a little mini series. But the more that I kind of try to think, the more that I think about that, like I even tried recording a couple of the lessons, and I'm just like, this is so eh. So instead, I'm gonna make one, maybe two, but probably one lesson around the range concept essentials, which will still cover like sounds and linking and the range in words and things like that. But it's going to focus more on like the basic concept that you can then go and like, you know, uh, notice in real speech. I'm just going to like give you the tools like, hey, this is a thing. Now go notice it. And we're going to talk about key things. Like I already have a lesson about like the range of the schwa, the range of the th sounds. I will probably be making a couple specific range lessons, like the range of the T and D on like the scale of that, like the strong, the weak, the flap, the held stop, or the glottal stop, the held stop, and then dropped. That'll be its own special lesson. So I might make a couple or a few more specific range lessons where like things are very noteworthy or special. But I think I'm going to make like a sort of a primary range concept essentials video that sort of like covers all the bases from sounds up to um, linking, and give you guys lots of examples, kind of go through some things, talk about some things that stand out. Like the range of E doesn't really stand out. I'm going to mention it because it's a good starting point. It's a good reference to like, hey, it doesn't always sound different. But then we get to like ah and the lazy ah, where it's like it's the same sound, but there's some difference to it. Um, and that's going to tie into the mouth posture course too. They're going to go together. But when we go through the sounds in the mouth posture course, you're going to be getting a lot of that detailed information of like the full version, the lazy version for all the sounds. So I think the range concept lesson, instead of it being like just a reiteration of that, it's just going to be like, here's the concept, here's some examples, and then uh, go notice it yourself, like go pay attention. You enunciated the we own even. Makes it sound weird. What? Should be really fast, like we own even. What? I'm so confused. Oh, when I was like reading it before. Yeah, like we don't even. Yeah, I don't. That wasn't the point. I was trying to like read it. Yeah, I got stuck on the second one. Um, but yeah, no, that's fine. That's another way to do it really quickly. But what I was saying is that in the most extreme case, you don't even need the N there, as long as you nasalize the O. So you literally say, "Can we drop the D in this one?" Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's right. In the positive for don't, you can just use a nasal O. Like it's like we nasal O even. That's possible. Yeah. Yeah, really fast speech is just broken. It's broken, but it's gonna sound so natural if you do it right. But remember, most of the time natives don't speak that fast and break it that much. It's possible, but like you shouldn't be trying to do that all the time, if at all. Like as an English learner, you never have to speak that fast. Like even if you're trying to sound like perfectly native and natural, you still never need to speak that fast. It's never required to speak that fast. That's one reason why I don't think it's very important. Like maybe if you're listening, so you can kind of like be like, wow, that's crazy that that can happen, and now I can like understand things better. Like, okay, sure, that's useful, but you never have to actually produce that. Um, if you're a GigaChat English learner, you do. Asserts your dominance. I suppose. I suppose. Okay. But like even for me, like if I were learning another language, like if I were learning English, especially English with all the chaos of the how the pronunciation works between the spelling and the sound and all this stuff. Um, but even if it were like Spanish, which is like phonetic spelling, well, mostly phonetic anyway. Uh, if like let's say if Spanish speakers like start to kind of break some things at really fast speed, I don't care. I'm not going to try to mimic that. Yeah, I know, right? Hey, if you want to take it all the way, go ahead, I guess. Um, but actually, I think that it would be slightly dangerous in a way, because if you're going to be practicing that speed and breaking things so much, if you get too used to it, you might just like speak that way all the time. And then it might actually be a little difficult for people to understand you because when natives speak that fast, it's with the exception of maybe teenage girls, it's not sustained, right? Like we tend to hang out, within normal speed, a little bit faster, a little bit slower, pretty normal. We'll dip into slow and enunciated when we need to, even if it's just like on a particular word or a particular syllable or even sometimes a particular sound. Um, we'll sort of dip into that when we need, go back to normal. Then if we're really excited or we're in a rush or whatever, or then we'll sort of dip up into the super, super fast, and then we'll come back down to normal. Um, so if you're always up here, I would imagine that it would start causing problems for sure. It is comfy, yes, but you get too lazy. You just get too lazy. Like, so I don't even know if I can, let's see how long I can do this. I'm probably gonna run out of things to say before I can finish what I want to say. Yeah, see, I can't even keep it going. But if I try to keep talking like this, and let's say, I don't know, I want to go to the beach yesterday. I was with my friends and we went to the movies. I don't know. We had a really great time. There's tons of popcorn and blah blah blah. I don't even know what to say. Like my thoughts can't even keep up with my my speech. So yeah, don't I wouldn't try to do that. I feel like you can definitely hear something sounds sus when you slow it down. Yeah. Well, super fast speed is like broken down to the bare essentials, right? Like that's what we were saying. Like, and it doesn't have to be the absolute bare essentials. Like we just discovered that you can actually, in order to say don't, you can literally just use a nasal O and that's all that's left. That's stripping down to bare essentials. Like there's not even a D anymore. I still think many times in really fast speech, there still probably would be like a quick flapped D in there, but potentially you can take it a step further. So it's like roughly more or less the bare essentials in super fast speech. Like even if I say even, like I'm probably gonna like even, like I'm not even putting a vowel between V and N. It's like even, mm, 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 mm. That's it. And that V is like almost non-existent. And then we, we, we. It's just like it's not even like a lazy W would be like we instead of right? We. I'm not even doing that. I'm doing like we, we. We'll even, we'll even. Like that's crazy. That's really pushing the boundary. Hi, how do you link? So the question mark should go at the end. You should put how do you link, maybe a comma or just nothing, and then the question mark goes at the end because otherwise it's like how do you link and then link what? Supposed to leave today. Good question. Yeah, this is a common one that trips you guys up. And again, I want to remind you because maybe you noticed this. Maybe you're asking because it's difficult, or maybe because you noticed something and you want to confirm what you noticed. In which case, very good job. But what I would say is that generally speaking, if you hear multiple natives do the same thing and you hear it a lot, it doesn't have to happen all the time because remember, it's a range. There's usually more than one answer. But if you hear natives doing the same thing multiple times, then it's probably something that you can adopt. Okay. Now you have to be a little careful sometimes because sometimes things might sound a little informal. Say walking, talking. Okay, it sounds a little more informal. You might not know that, but in general, if you pay attention to the language is going to show you how it works. Like it's there for you to learn from. But supposed to leave today. If I clearly enunciate supposed to leave, we would almost never say it that way, even if we're clearly enunciating. But it would be a Z sound plus a D, and then two. Still more or less enunciated, but not hyper enunciated. We probably say supposed to, or maybe supposed to. You don't have to reduce the two to 10, especially if you're enunciating more. And so there's sort of a little hold maybe between the supposed and the two because there's a D there, right? And you're supposed to kind of like hold it. However, remember how we've talked before about like SKS or like STS, stuff like that. Now, this isn't the same thing, but this is related. So when we do like SKS, STS, or SPS, we can do sort of like a lazy version. And like for SKS, we'll just go like have the S here and then the K is back here, right? So you just like you hold the S, so you don't have to actually close the K. You can just like move the back of the tongue a little bit. Creates the illusion that the K is there, and you can say asks, 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 instead of asks, right? Um, when we have supposed to, so it's supposed to be because there's a D at the end. It's supposed to be supposed. Okay. But when we put to after it, something very interesting happens. Now, 9 times out of 10, the word to, the preposition to, will get affected by the sound before it. Okay. Like if we say go to, go to, becomes a flap D because there's a vowel before it, it's voiced. So triggers a flap. That's the most common way to say it, not the only way to say it. In the case of supposed to, you would think, okay, well, I'm saying supposed, so there's a D sound, so then the T should turn into a D, right? So I should say, we're supposed to leave today. Supposed to leave today. And I think that might be a way to say it. It doesn't sound too bad, but it definitely wouldn't be the most common way to say it. There are a few cases like in supposed to or in have to. Right? Have is a V, but we say half. We change the V into a F. We let the voicelessness of to change the V into an F instead of letting the voicedness of V turn the T into a D, which is what usually happens. So this is a special case where it goes backwards. Supposed to is another special case where it goes backwards. So you can completely ignore the D, in which case now the S is just going to be a regular S. It's not going to be a Z. It's a weird thing, but it makes it a lot easier to speak. That's why this changes. So we'll say suppose to, and the T stays a T because now it's an S sound, right? We wouldn't change it because it's already voiceless. So supposed to. So if you say supposed to, okay, which I don't think that ever exists because I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a D after it. But it sounds like that. It sounds like as if there's no D and the S is an actual S instead of a Z sound. Supposed to. Or you can reduce to supposed to. The stupid thing, the strange thing is you can actually say supposed to. So you can sort of keep the S, change the T into a D still. To is stupid. More often than not, though, the simple short answer here is say suppose and keep the T as a T. Supposed to. So we're supposed to leave today. Supposed to leave today. No problem. So there's multiple ways to do it, but the most common way would probably be S plus T. I'm more of a hectic person, so sometimes that happens. Oh, yeah. Talk about the fast speed. Just be careful, though. Be careful. I think what we want is flexibility in our speech, as in being able to slow down or speed up if need be. Exactly, and that's part of what I'm trying to give you guys. Because I think the way, I mean, again, I don't follow all the resources. I don't follow everything that every teacher says. But based on what I've seen, based on what, people have asked me questions about and things like that, it seems like you guys are taught like, okay, this is this sound. And in this word, this is pronounced this way. And this linking rule is this. And like they don't tell you the reality of the range and the variation. It's just like it's always just like this is this. Maybe sometimes they'll say, well, you could do this or this and it'll sound fine. But they kind of just say like, oh, hey, so if you have like I don't know what's a good example here. So like with Goda, right? They'll say, oh, so notice natives actually they don't say go to, they say Goda. So don't say go to, say Goda. And it's like as like a very general point of like advice, because that is probably the most common way to say it. So it works. But then you take that and you're like, oh, okay, so natives say Goda. All right. So I'm gonna say Goda. And you start doing that, and great. Okay. And then you notice sometimes natives say go to. Sometimes natives say go to. Sometimes natives say go do with a flap D, go do. And you're like, huh, I thought it was supposed to be go to. Why am I hearing natives say, is this a regional thing? No, it's not regional. There's a range. The reality is it's a range of possibilities. And so obviously, like there's a trade-off there. If a teacher just teaches this is the answer, That makes it easier for the teacher, it makes it easier for the student. Um, and it makes it simple, right? Especially if they're giving you the statistically most common possibility, which I think is it's sufficient, it's good, right? But it causes problems because the more that you actually pay attention to the language, or if you have somebody like me come along and say, hey, there's another way to say this, you might think that I'm teaching you some regional thing. You might think that I'm wrong or I don't know what I'm talking about. When no, I'm telling you that I'm a native speaker. I know how this works. I'm a neutral sounding general American native speaker. And this is the reality of speech in American English. So um, I although the trade-off is that makes it a little more complicated, it seems maybe a little less practical kind of, but it gives you the whole picture, and I think that it's still very useful to have that whole picture, if for nothing else than you're listening, just so you know what's going on and you don't think something is like regional or you don't get confused. You're like, okay, yeah, this can happen too. This is how the speech works in American English, even though most of the time it's probably going to be this answer. Or sometimes it might be like a 50-50 split between like with t and ya and you, like get you, um whatever, like get you can become a ch, or it could become a stop t. Get you, they're both super common. So that's part of what I want to do, is give you guys the full picture, or at least make you aware that there's a full picture that you might not be being told from other resources or other teachers. Um, Not that that makes them bad teachers or bad resources. They're just, they're giving you sort of the most common, sort of easy answer, like do this, right? And as far as your speech goes, as far as like you producing the language, I think that's definitely sufficient. But you should be aware that there are more possibilities usually. It's pretty stupid. Once I asked a pronunciation channel if I could drop the N or T in don't get, and they said I had to go up for the N, hold the T, and then go into the G always, which now looking back is so incredibly stupid because I myself never did, and I would second guess myself because of it. They'll only teach you the most basic things like flapping your T's and yada yada. Yeah. Yeah. And again, I don't watch a lot of other teachers' content, but I have seen, just because of the nature of like the work I do, sometimes I'll get video recommendations in my feed from other teachers. And sometimes I'll see something from like Rachel's English. I don't know if it's just like the thumbnail to like make it more attractive. It's a little clickbaity, and then like in the lesson maybe she'll explain the nuance. But I'll see sometimes where she has the thumbnail where it's like oh, don't say this, like don't say to, like the preposition to, like don't pronounce it to. Um, and maybe in the lesson she goes and explains the nuance of it, or maybe she just says, hey, natives like pretty much always reduce it to ta, so you should say ta. It's like, okay, yeah. But she's like the single biggest channel. And if even she's doing things like that, not giving you guys the whole picture, it starts to make a bit more sense to me why a lot of people are coming to my channel, and why I get comments like I got the other day, just like thanking me so much for the detail that I go into, because other people just don't talk about it. So clearly there's a need and a desire for that stuff, because as I said, you guys should pay attention to the language, listen to it. It's there for you to interact with. And then when you do that, you notice things that teachers don't tell you. And then when you ask them, especially if which this isn't necessarily the teacher's fault, especially if they're a native speaker. Um, as I've said before, there's things that you guys have asked me that at first I was like, no. But then I thought about it more, I played with it more, I started to notice it more, and I was like, oh, this is something that I wasn't conscious of, that my brain was filtering, but we do that. And so sometimes it's not the teacher's fault. It's just we don't think of it that way. Because if there's like I don't get, our brain, even if I say like I don't get, I don't get, I don't get, I don't get. So I'm not saying the N or the T at all. I'm partially nasalizing the O. What my brain, or if any native speaker said it that way, or if I'm trying to say I don't get, My brain, whether it's input or output, means and understands I don't get, but that's not what's produced. And the brain just sort of filters it, right? Uh, so there's some of that. Rachel's the best one out of them, to be honest. She goes into some hacks and things that break in fast speech, and she really explains how things works. She's one of the channels that stands out from the others because she teaches niche stuff that other teachers either shy away from or are not aware of because they're native speakers. Sounds like me. um, but yeah, and obviously she's been on the platform a long time. She has a first mover advantage, but I don't doubt that there's definitely a reason why she's the biggest channel. Um, and what I've seen, like you guys know, I disagree with the placement idea. Speaking from your chest, I think it's nonsense. But what I've seen from her generally, I'm like, yeah, like this person knows what they're talking about. And she's one of the few teachers that agrees with me that, like, say S plus T, S plus P, S plus K. Most teachers and even linguists, I think, will tell you that, like, it changes it, right? And like it's no longer a T. So if we say like mistake, it's more like a D. And as I've told you guys before, like now I came out with a hack a little while ago where it's like you might as well just say it as the weak version of the voiced one because most natives won't notice the difference anyway, and it sounds very similar. But I know I saw a video from her where she was saying like, no, it's still a T, and that's what I say too. I think it's still a T. It just sounds a bit more like a D than it normally does because of the influence of the S. So there's some things that apparently her and I agree on that most people don't. And so that also helps tell me that maybe I'm also on the right track because we share some ideas, even if we disagree with some things. So anyway, I was saying something about, yeah. So now as for this, I don't get, okay, you had to go up for the answer. Don't hold the T and then push out the G. So very standard, right? So don't get. So he's saying hold the T and then push out the G. Don't get. See, now the thing for me, this is so stupid. Like I don't even just as like a native, if this person is a native speaker, this is not a mistake that they should this is not a mistake that they should be making with what they're teaching you. Like I'm surprised because if I try to physically go and say d o n, stop the T and then push out a G, it's more difficult for me to do that in my mouth. Like it's I have to actually try to do that. I don't get. It's just like, how do I fit that in my mouth? Now, if I'm going to push out the T and I say I don't get, that's fine because I'm pushing out the T, and that's also possible. It's very unlikely, but it's possible. But to fully go into the N, like that's not even required at all because you can stop the T from here. Even if you don't partially nasalize the O and you just do a glottal stop T, do, I don't get. Might sound like maybe you have a little bit of a cold, but it would still be understandable. But what we're probably going to do is partially nasalize the O, don't do the N at all, do a glottal stop T, and then release the G. Don't get. Don't get. So much easier that way. I don't get. And then that also kind of pisses me off, honestly, because and I'm sure that to some extent I'm still a victim of this because there's things I'm not consciously aware of as a native. But when you hear something like that from somebody who's not only a native but a teacher, and then like Finn, you're lucky because you, like, if I remember, you were the one who said like since you were like 12 or something or whatever, you've been speaking English, and that's part of why you have a good pronunciation and everything. So it's kind of, you're kind of lucky because you already do a lot of things naturally anyway, where the average English learner, they're going to, if they like that teacher and they trust that teacher and they hear that from them, and then they're going to be like, that's so hard to do. They're going to think it's their fault, maybe because of their native language or because of some incompetence that they have, some inability that they have to not be able to produce that. When I myself, as a native speaker, just told you that the way that they describe to produce that is more difficult for me than doing it the way I would normally do it, the way that most natives would normally do it. Okay. So now you have a case where the teacher, again, I'm sure that they're just maybe not consciously aware of it. They're not trying to mislead anybody. I don't think that's the case at all, but they're actually causing harm to the learner, maybe, which might end up in demotivation at some point. But I get questions a lot where people say like, oh, how do I do this combination, like the S to the TH or whatever, because it's like so difficult. Like, I don't know if I just like can't do it, or there's like something wrong with my teeth or my tongue or this or that. And I think more often than not, it's just because the way that you guys are taught is not in line with the way that people actually speak. Right? Because you guys are usually taught like the pure perfect version, like the TH. I hate the way the TH is taught because they say, put the tongue between the teeth. It's like, okay, yeah, true. That works. We do that. Not usually, but we do that. Um, that's like the pure version of the sound that we might use if we're exaggerating or we're really enunciating. Sometimes it'll come out that way and that's fine, but it's never required to put your tongue between the teeth to produce a TH sound. And I think, again, I don't follow all these resources. I can't say for sure, but my impression is that most teachers and most resources don't tell you that. They just say, put the tongue between the teeth. And almost every student I've ever had, when they're asking me about the TH sound, they always, I think pretty much every single person has told me that they were told to put the tongue between the teeth. And when I fix that, magically they can speak more easily because they're actually speaking the way natives do. We don't do that all the time because it makes speaking a little more difficult and it's not required to produce a sound. So why would we do that all the time? We don't enunciate everything all the time. It's just, see, this is part of what I'm here to fix. I don't get it. And I'm sure that, the other teachers, I don't want to bash any other teachers, I'm sure they're all good intentions. Probably some things that they're not consciously aware of, just like I'm sure there's some things I'm still not consciously aware of. I might make that same mistake unintentionally, but still, like, I think some of these, just the way that it's taught needs to change. It's just pure and simple. The way that it's taught needs to change. There needs to be more nuance to match the reality of how people actually speak, not the perfect enunciated version of everything that nobody uses unless we need to dip into it. So anyway, okay, so you think that if an illiterate native speaker were to try to spell stairs, they would definitely spell it with ST instead of SD? That's an interesting question. I honestly have no idea. Maybe. Like, my brain is like, no, that's impossible. That would never happen. But then at the same time, I'm like, well, if they're illiterate and they don't know, how things are spelt, then, which, by the way, notice I said spelt. We can say spelled or spelt in American English, doesn't matter. Then yeah, if it could sound, as I even said, like most natives won't hear the difference if it's a T or a D. It might sound more like a weak D. And so it is possible. Um, once you are literate, right, especially like in English, that's how we're able to most of the time spell. Sometimes we have to double check and look things up, but we're generally able to spell and type really quickly and write really quickly and stuff, even though our spelling system is horrible compared to how the sounds actually work. Because we'll learn exceptions when we have to learn exceptions, but we tend to associate certain patterns. So like OA, like it's funny because the letter O, if you see the letter O, it's almost guaranteed that it's not going to be the sound O. There are some exceptions in small words like go, so, no, right? But much more commonly, if it's going to be the O sound, there's going to be some other silent letter, right? Like OA, oat, moat, goat, soap, loathe, right? Or a silent W. So like no, grow, low, slow, bow, right? Which could also be bow, different sound, spelled the same. But we get used to that. It sort of becomes internalized when we learn how to read and write. And so when a at least a literate native speaker, not an illiterate, but a literate native speaker who knows how to read and write, when we hear the word stairs and when we think of the word stairs, we don't even think of a D sound. Like we don't think of it as a D sound. We think of it as a T. Like there's a T there because that's how it's spelled. That's the association in the brain as far as the spelling goes. Um, and then, which I do think it is still technically a T. It's a little bit more of a T. There's a T-ness to it, but it is very, very, very close to a weak D. So even though it sounds very close to a weak D, and even if you do a weak D, most natives won't notice that you're doing that. We think of it as a T. We don't think of it as like stairs, like with a D. We think of it as stairs, even though we don't say it that way. It's an interesting thing. Nobody ever taught us about the TH variations. Yeah, which doesn't make any sense because especially for the THs, I'm not going to go into a rant. I'm not going to go into a rant. I'm actually like over time. I'm going to have to go, but I've been doing them since I was 12 and could notice sometimes I would do it differently, but no one ever mentioned it in any video. I felt so unsure, like it was some wrong hack that I'd come up with myself. That made me sound weird. Yeah. So, and the only reason why you question that is because you're not a native, right? You started young, but not young enough. And so you're like, this feels natural. This seems to be what I hear. It makes sense, but nobody's talking about it. So am I wrong? It's no wonder why I get the kind of comments I do on my channel. I just don't get why other teachers don't talk about this stuff. It's completely mind-blowing. Like, why? Now, I get it if a teacher has an erroneous, meaning mistaken, an erroneous philosophy that language learners should always speak in a clear, enunciated way. I think that's a very, very erroneous philosophy. Even if your goal isn't to sound like a native, if you do that, it's probably actually going to be harder for us to understand you. That's the irony of it, because you're clearly enunciating everything. You think you'd be nice and clear and easy to understand, but that's usually not the case, because people don't speak that way, right? So that, I would say, is just plain wrong. Like any teacher that says that, you probably should just not listen to them at all. I don't care what they say. They could be giving you like perfectly good information, but if they're focused primarily on fully clearly enunciated speech all the time, and that's how they think that you should speak that way all the time, in my opinion, they're a bad teacher. Just period. They're a bad teacher. Now, if they give you that maybe as a starting point and they say like, okay, like, you should generally speak a little more clearly. You don't have to always speak, really fast. That's not too bad, right? That's not too bad. Of course, you don't have to speak super, super fast. You don't have to sound completely natural if you don't want to. But to say that you should always enunciate everything super clearly, that's not a teacher you should be listening to, in my opinion. no matter what your goal is, because that's just going to steer you wrong no matter what you do. And I think that actually goes right back to what we're talking about, that the perception we have as natives of the language, like we don't realize that, say, like we partially nasalize the O and don't, and then don't actually close into an N. We don't realize that consciously, but we do it all the time. We think we're saying O, N, and we can do that still. It might come out that way, but often we don't. That's just one little example, or like not pushing the th through the teeth, right? When we think about, okay, how would I do a th sound? When we think of the perfect sound, like what is a th? So we kind of think about it that way, but then when we actually use it, we usually do more like we don't actually push it through the teeth, or we'll do the dental T or D variation, which is extremely common as well. Which that's a thing that most teachers don't even acknowledge exists, apparently. And so I think this emphasis many teachers have on like clear enunciated speech, they're under the false perception that that will be clear, when actually it tends to make you harder to understand, because they don't realize that the way that they naturally speak isn't, like, even if they themselves are trying to generally be clear and like professional, like if because maybe they hold their speech to a certain standard, and they always especially if they're interacting in like a business environment or giving a speech or something, they might always generally want to speak more clearly, not sound too informal at any time. Some people are like that, but even then they're going to be using certain linking rules and producing sounds in certain ways that they don't even realize that they're doing. um, and then they teach you to, like, oh, always do it this way that I think we always do it, when they themselves don't actually always do it that way. um, so I think it's just a big mess. And that's a stupid thing. And I'm sitting here, like, obviously I want to grow the channel, like I want this to be a thing that I can like do as like a job. I haven't even hit $100 in a month yet. uh, but really, like, one of my main things is like, I want to fix this. And because my channel is so small, there's only a relative handful, like compared to 4 million that Rachel's English has, 4.5 million now almost, I think. um, there's just a handful of people who have heard the things that I've been talking about. And it's just like, I want to reach so many more people and be like, hey, no, like, this is the reality. Anyway, sad story is I have a recording of myself saying the dental D 2 years ago, before I knew about dental TH. I was able to do it because of teachers. I lost my ability to do it. So you were doing the right thing and they trained it out of you. This makes me mad, guys. It really makes me mad. Like, I know I'm a weird person, that like this is something that I care about and I get upset about. But it does. This is why I'm here. And of course, you guys also have to understand from my perspective, because like I know that I know what I'm talking about. Like, um, but at the same time, I don't get it as much these days, but I used to get a lot of imposter syndrome, which is like, even if like everything you're saying is a fact, and like that it's a fact, like it's verifiable as a fact, you still feel like somebody's going to find you out, that like you're a fake, you're an imposter or whatever. Um, and I don't get that as much anymore these days, but like especially because like this whole discussion, and like I'm kind of going against the grain. I'm like, hey, there's this common thing called the dental T or D that you can use to replace the TH sounds. Natives do it all the time and we don't realize it. It's not informal. Just don't you use a regular T or D in English to replace it and you sound great. But no other teachers talk about it. And any teachers that get asked about it apparently say, no, that doesn't exist, or no, you shouldn't do that. And just the fact that I seem to be alone on a lot of these points I know that I'm not wrong. I know that I'm not wrong. And many of you guys have experienced it for yourselves, actually listening to the language as it is. So, don't take my word for it. Listen to the language. I'm just telling you how the language actually is. Um, but at the same time, being the one who's like seemingly, I'm sure maybe there's a couple people here and there somewhere on the internet who talks about this point or that point, but um, like apparently Rachel's English goes into some of the nuances as well. But it just feels like I know I'm not wrong, but because I'm the only one talking about it, it kind of feels like maybe I am. And it's so stupid because it's, I think that it's like human wiring. Like we're wired to be social. We're wired to, like conform more or less. Even the more rebellious of us, it's part of human wiring, usually for social bonds and stuff. And so there's part of my brain that is like, hey, you should conform. You should teach the way everybody else teaches. Of course, I'm not going to do that because I'm teaching you guys actual real English. But it's just like, it kind of gets to me sometimes. Like I was thinking about that last night. I've actually been thinking about that a lot over the last like week. It's just been like on my mind, like, and then the Geoff Lindsay made that video talking about the schwa, and I made my response video. I don't expect him to respond necessarily, but like I'm sure that there's some teachers who agree more with his view than my view, or linguists who agree more with his view than my view, and it's just like I just don't know. I don't get it. And then the whole like long vowels versus short vowels thing, or vowels being shorter before voiceless consonants, and it's just like some of the things I seem to be literally the only one going against, and it's kind of like, I could be wrong on some things. I always admit that, but I don't think I am. It's just, yeah. So when you guys comment and you say like, oh, thank you, nobody else is talking about this, you're helping me so much, all this stuff, like it really helps because it like I'm getting feedback from you guys saying like, yeah, I'm noticing these things in real speech and this is making it easier for me to speak. And I don't know why nobody else talks about this because it exists. It's like, okay, good. I'm not the only one who is, noticing these things about how natives speak. So it does help when you guys, and I'm not saying like, hey, pat me on the back every time I put out a lesson. I definitely don't want that. That would be annoying. But it does help when you guys give me feedback like that. So I just feel like a lone English teaching warrior on some of these topics. It's just like, I'm going to say what I believe to be true. And, if other teachers disagree, then I guess we'll have to disagree. So sometimes I feel like I'm in a limbo between an English learner and a native speaker. Interesting. Because I can't relate to English learners at all. But at the same time, sometimes I feel like I have questions native speakers wouldn't have, like not knowing if I should say on or in his album. Okay. That actually depends on the use of album. If it's a musical album, we would say on. If it's a photo album, we would say in. And there's a reason for that. That goes to the logic of prepositions. But that's a different topic. But like on the other hand, I see Delio there as well. But like on the other hand, I can pass as an American and can perceive very subtle nuances and meaning in the language. And I would say I have the vocabulary of an average American high schooler. It's a limbo, basically. I don't know how to feel about it. Yeah, that's interesting. This sucks. Like, I don't really know what to tell you about that, but I mean, eventually, hopefully that should go away. Like you should get the language into you well enough that those kind of questions go away. But maybe those kinds of questions might not ever go away. I don't know. We're talking about some really subtle, deep level things here, but I feel like 80% of viewers in most channels are at a beginner or lower intermediate. That is true. Yes. Oh, guys, you don't even know. You don't even know, because you know how usually when I explain things, like, I start from 0 to make sure everybody has all the pieces and I can, like, build it up from there? That's usually my explanation method. Like, I want so bad to teach this pronunciation stuff to, like, absolute beginners who speak no English, and, like, I have a plan to do that in some way with a book that I'm just gonna wanna to get, like, translated into a bunch of different languages. But I can't do that in video content because, like, obviously you can't understand me if you're a complete beginner and no English, right? And then, like, maybe if I made, like, a whole thing in Spanish and then a whole thing in this language and a whole, like, I can't do that, right? And, like, maybe if I had an army of people to do subtitles for me in different languages, uh, that could maybe become something of a reality. But it's, I want so bad to just be like, this is where you should start. Like, before you get, misled by other resources or, whatever, like, just, I'm going to teach you how to actually, you know, notice the language. And yeah, anyway, I don't know. I guess that's one of the reasons why most channels tend to teach a watered down version of American English really works. Probably. Plus, it's easier that way, right? Like, there's some lessons that I've made for you guys, or that I want to make for you guys, where I'm just like, this, like, I don't like the easy. There's the easy way to teach it, right? And then there's the way that I want to teach it, and I'm just like, this is hard. And I might, like, record the same lesson like 3 or 4 times because I'm just like, this is coming out as garbage. I'm not able to communicate what I want to communicate in an easy way. Um, so yeah, it's easy to stick to the surface instead of going into variations and how things actually work. But that's where I want to go. Like, there's no point. My channel would, if I weren't trying to teach you guys the things I'm trying to teach you, whether from pronunciation or, like, the logic of prepositions and stuff, like, my channel wouldn't really have a purpose to exist. Like, there are plenty of English teachers on here, online in general in the world. There are plenty of English teachers that you could learn from. But I have a specific mission that I'm trying to do, which kind of goes against the grain, fixes a lot of the inadequacies that I see with the way things are usually taught and this and that. And so that's kind of the real purpose of my channel, is, like, not that I'm, like, trying to sit here and say everybody else is wrong, because a lot of what most people teach is not wrong. It's like, it's right. It's just maybe not always the most nuanced, the most accurate. So that's really why I'm here. It's not like I don't even want to teach English, honestly. Like, I never thought I'd be an English teacher. Like, it's not that I don't like it. Like, I like making the content for you guys and stuff. But if you were to say, like, hey, if you could just pick one thing to be for the rest of your life, like, go, English teacher would not be at the top of my list. But I feel that I have something to contribute here and that I can really help you guys. And apparently it's helping you guys. So I feel that it's valuable work that I'm doing. I really want to get to my second channel, which I'm not going to be able to get to for a while, but not that I'm going to stop this channel. This channel is going to be going for quite a while. But my second channel is where my life is going to be a little bit more fun. So I feel like when you're learning a language, you eventually get to a point where only a handful of channels are of any use. Yeah, probably. Have you ever heard of someone in a situation similar to mine? I want to say no, not off the top of my head. Maybe. I definitely have had some students that, like, maybe they didn't start as young as you did, but they have been learning English for 5, maybe 10 years. Their English is quite good, whether that's pronunciation and or grammar. But they started, maybe when they were, like, in college or something. So a bit older than you. I think you're a little bit of a special case because since, if I remember, you were the one who said that you were like 12 or something. Um, you're sort of like, I guess we could say so like at a line where like not young enough to have it natively, but also not really old enough to, I don't know. It's a weird line. It's a weird line. It's sort of this like weird, awkward in between thing, which I guess is sort of putting you in that limbo. Um, so I've had students who explain something kind of similar in a way, but not the same. Not the same. But I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't give up on it. I wouldn't worry about it too much. You keep going, keep interacting with the language, keep trying things, keep noticing things. Right. We always have to remember for like your native language, before you even really started to like speak, you had, I mean, people start speaking at different times, but you probably already had like 1, 2, maybe 3 years of exposure of just absorbing the language. And that's like doing that 24/7. Aside from when you're sleeping, of course. So I guess babies sleep a lot. So maybe not 24/7, but that's like your full-time job as a baby. You're just like absorbing things. Um, so that's a ton of hours. And so even going from like 12 to, however old you are now, that might be still quite a few years, but you're also a little bit older when you started. You, if you're not in an English speaking country, you're still surrounded by your native language, right? So you're not getting as much input as you would say if you were a native speaking English baby. Um, you probably have to use your native language, I'm sure. Uh, so you don't have, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it still kind of makes sense to me if that's the circumstance of why you might be in that limbo. So just keep going. Just keep going. It should sort itself out. I feel dishonest saying I'm a native speaker to other natives, but I also feel dishonest saying I'm an English learner to other English learners. I know. It's like, how do you classify yourself? In English, I really need to go. I'm so over time. If it were me, I would describe myself as a semi-native speaker. I think that that's accurate and fair. A semi-native speaker. Yeah. And the funny thing is, if you tell that to most natives, because I've never actually heard you, but based off of what I know of your abilities and whatnot, I'm going to assume that most natives that you tell that to, they'll probably laugh at you at first because they'll be like, "Yeah, okay." um, so yeah, if you don't want to say native, just say semi-native, or say like I'm 99% native. Whatever. I'm a partial native. I'm a half-baked native. How about that? Half-baked. um, anyway, an English speaker might work. I'm an English speaker. Yeah. That does work. Yeah. But that's also very broad. Because I could say that too. I'm an English speaker. That doesn't tell you I'm a native. If I randomly met you and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm an English speaker," like maybe I just mastered the pronunciation and the grammar, and I just have a really high level. But maybe I was born speaking German. Who knows? So I guess that's kind of the case here. I'd say I can relate to that because I've had lots of years worth of immersion. So I'd say my vocab is quite large if I do say so myself. That said, I'm not that young anymore. So yeah. Well, anyway, good talk, good conversation. Just keep going, Finn. You'll You'll be fine. Always focus on the input, especially you seem like you don't have any problems with the output, really. Like you said, sometimes you're not sure if you should use this or that, but if you get enough input, you're gonna be like, okay, this sounds right. And you'll still run into edge cases like with album, where, as I said, it depends on how album is used. So you've probably heard on an album and in an album, and that might be what is sort of causing that confusion because, like, you've heard both. Like they both feel right, but I'm not sure like which one should I use. Like it's kind of confusing. Well, it depends on how album is used. Um, so that makes sense to me that like you've had enough exposure where it should be one of those, but you're not sure, but you haven't had enough exposure to say that particular word in its different uses to naturally know, oh, in this context, in is what I should naturally use. And it just happens. So that's why you're sort of in that limbo period, I think. Kyoto, in Brazil, we start having English classes in elementary school, but it's not the English because the own teachers are still learning. Yeah. We're gonna say the teachers. You don't say own. You can say the very teachers maybe, but we should say the teachers are still learning, or the teachers themselves. There you go. The teachers themselves. Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to say. Yeah, no, that I've had a couple students. One actually from Brazil. But I've had a couple students who are non-native English teachers, and uh, me personally, if I'm learning a language, just because of my preferences, like I would never want to take classes from a non-native teacher. Like maybe if they could speak at a level where they could more or less fool a native, okay, like I'll go with that. But otherwise, and I mean pronunciation and grammar, not just pronunciation, but otherwise, like I would prefer to have a native speaking teacher. Which, of course, as we were discussing, the downside to that is the teachers may not actually be fully aware of the things that they actually do. So it's sort of a trade-off, right? Like if you learn the language as a non-native, you might be aware of things that natives aren't consciously aware of. But then if you don't have the mastery over the grammar and the pronunciation as a non-native teacher, then that, of course, shows a weakness in itself. And it's sort of like, one of the very long-term ambitions I have in this space, it would be targeted at English learning, but it would also just be language learning in general. And I don't know if this is ever going to happen. If it does, it'll probably be like 20, 30, 40 years from now. And hopefully things will have improved by then because the teaching methodology for languages has improved over the last, say, 20, 30 years. But I want so bad to just travel the world, going to different schools, different school districts, and helping, whether they're native teachers or not, but especially if they're not native teachers, just say like, hey, pronunciation first, pronunciation first, pronunciation first. And other things. I have some other ideas that you guys are going to find out about later in the future, but just like fixing a lot of the inadequacies that I see with the way that languages are normally taught. And of course, again, there's no one best way, but I still do think that there's way too much emphasis on academic knowledge rather than actual skill development and whatnot. So I want to fix it. Of course, fixing a classroom setting is a lot different than fixing a one-on-one setting. Teaching someone one-on-one is a lot easier. So, but yeah, I took, when I was taking that class on Portuguese, I dropped out halfway through because I just, I was busy with other things and I was just like, okay, well, I'm going to go to the class. Like I wasn't studying Portuguese in earnest, like, hey, I'm going to learn this language. It was just like, okay, because I was supposed to be taking another class, but they didn't have it that semester. So I said, well, I'll just take this Portuguese class instead because it seems interesting. And I had to drop out because I was just like, if I would have just taken like the 5, 6 weeks that I've been in this class and did it myself, I would be like 3 or 4 times farther than I am now. And of course, I know what I'm doing. That helps. But still, at the same time, like, this is an experienced teacher who speaks like 3 different languages, teaching a class, Portuguese, and most of the people in the class were Spanish speakers, so they already have that benefit too. And still, just like I was just like how the class was going, I was just like pulling my hair out because I'm like, why? This could be so much better. And I didn't want to like go up to the teacher and be like, hey, teach, you think about this, because like they're the one with the job, that it's their class. Like, I think that would be a little rude and disrespectful and wouldn't be very welcomed. So I just left the class because I was just like, I'm wasting my time here. So I started having contact with the language when I was a kid through music. Good. That's nice. Music is a fantastic vehicle for language. I was obsessed with Lady Gaga. Yeah. I got bullied a lot for that by my siblings. Yeah. So who cares? Lady Gaga. I was never too big on Lady Gaga. Her music is very catchy. I'm not the biggest fan of her myself, but that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Getting bullied for stuff like that is very normal, unfortunately. You shouldn't be bullied for that. Like, I really liked Britney Spears when I was like 10. And I don't think many people really knew about that. Otherwise, I probably would have been bullied myself. But people are like that, especially siblings. Siblings can be mean. I grew up in the internet culture. Thank God. Yeah, I know. Thank God, not thanks God. If you say thanks God and you put like a comma, it's like you're directly saying like thanks God. Like, okay. But normally we say thank God as an expression, not like directly talking to God. Yeah, the internet has brought us some good things, some bad things. Generally good things. And I think on this particular topic, yeah, there's been a lot of good, because you can connect with people that, like, you might feel really isolated, like in your home or your hometown or whatever, and then you go online and there are other people who are also interested in the same things, and you're like, oh my God. Like, I kind of feel sad that I'm as old as I am. I'm only 32, but I was born in 89. So I remember early internet, like when it was connected to the phone line and you couldn't make a phone call while you were on the internet. And those were bad times, because your mom's always like, stay off the computer, I'm waiting for a call. It's like, now we don't have to deal with that anymore. In fact, now you can be on the internet and the phone at the same time on this little device. So how far we've come. But yeah, because I'm thinking like there's the oldest game in the world, Go. It's from ancient China, over 5,000 years old, still played very much in the East, China, Japan, and Korea. Called, I think, Wei Qi in Chinese, Ego in Japan, and Paduk in Korean. I was really, really, I still want to become a Shodan, sort of a black belt in that. But I was really big on it in high school. And I learned about it through a manga. And at that time, the internet was still kind of young. I was like, 14? So this was 2003-ish. So still pretty early internet. And I was able to find a club online, a Go club, which was great, because like I was literally like one of the only people that I knew that played the game, and I could play online on like in online Go salons where you just like match up against people. I spent a lot of time doing that. If I didn't have the internet, that would have sucked. Like I would just like be playing by myself all the time, and that would be boring. Um, but I found a Go club. The only problem was that it was located like 15 miles from where I lived. And I went there once and it was a really good time, but I didn't go back again because it was so far. Because like I couldn't even drive at the time. My mom would have to take me. And so I imagine if maybe I had been born a little bit later, I don't know, maybe there would have been more people interested in the game through the internet and there would have been more clubs a little more closer to me. And I don't know. But like Gen Z coming up with the internet, like it's just a completely new world for you guys. So I'm in a limbo myself being a millennial because like I don't really know what life was like without the internet. Like I have an idea because I still played outside a lot and like wasn't on the computer and like there was no social media when I was like, 7, 8, 9, 10. Go ride my bikes, or ride my bike with friends and, you know, all that stuff, which I know some kids still do that today too. But um I know a lot of kids these days, like, you're always on your phone, always on the computer, social media, blah, blah, blah. Like, I didn't grow up with that. And so it's sort of like, I don't know how life was like for my parents, but I also don't really completely know what it's like to grow up like how Gen Z has grown up. I feel like I'm sort of in between where it's like I have a foot in both worlds. And it just makes me feel like with all like this TikTok stuff and like the new slang that Gen Z is like, oh, that's like that's fire, that's gas or whatever. Like I don't even I just like feel lost half the time. Like I feel like an old person. But then at the same time, like I remember the time before the internet was a common thing. And it's like for some reason that doesn't make me feel old, but I don't know, takes me back to simpler times, I guess. I don't know, it's weird. I just feel like I'm in between the two. Um, sometimes I heard I love you between friends. Yeah, some friends will do that. That's fine. There's fraternal love, which is like love between friends. It's called fraternal love. Or what is it called? Oh, it's brotherly. Can't think of the word. Yeah, it's slipping my mind right now, but yeah, there's different types. The problem that you can't tell if a teacher can fool a native because you aren't. Yeah, I know, right? That's always that's the catch 22. um, yep, yep. There was actually some guy. I know he was a troll, but still, there was one guy. I had to ban him from the channel because he was leaving all these like ridiculous comments, and he was telling me that like me as a native speaker, like I'm speaking wrong. And he actually had some videos on his channel, so I went and listened to him, and I was like your pronunciation is garbage. Like I don't mean to be offensive, but like he's telling me that as a native, I'm pronouncing my language wrong. And then he's just like almost not understandable. um, so yeah, I don't know. Some people. Lady Gaga is pretty famous around here. Well, I think she's still famous here. Not as popular as she was, but in Spanish, this phrase is used between. Yeah, so that'd be romantic or familial. Well, in Spanish, there's amar and there's querer. Um, and I my understanding is amar is like stronger. It can sound like more poetic and sound like te amo, right? Te amo, mi amor, mi corazón. But te quiero is probably like more common every day. I don't know if you use that between friends or not. But yeah, I think in general in English culture, friends don't usually say that, but there are friends who do. It's fine. To be honest, I'd rather have classes from someone who has a native level because they know how to get there and speak the language well while not being as unaware as native speakers. Yeah, that's a good point. That's sort of like the best of both worlds. But at the same time, like if you're a learner, like Abdullah said, how can you tell? Right? Because it's like, well, you want them to have that really high level, but you can't analyze them for that level because obviously you're learning, right? You need them as a teacher. So it's like, how do you tell? At least if the person is a native speaker, you know that they're going to be doing things right because they're a native speaker. They may not be conscious of everything and they might tell you that this is wrong, even though they do it because they're not aware. But at least you can be certain that they have that level. You don't have to analyze it. And you might still run into some problem with accents, right? So like if, say, somebody is from the South, like I've had students that tell me, actually, usually the South people can tell the difference from, but I've had students who tell me like, oh yeah, there's, some people from like say between British English and American English. I've had students say like they can't tell the difference. And to me, I'm just like, that's impossible. But I get it. I totally get it. It makes sense. So like if you're like, hey, this person says they're a native, I'm learning American English, and then you don't realize that they're a British English teacher, like that might be a problem. So so thanks to God. We would also probably hear again, you could say thanks to God, we'd probably just say thank God. But it's just a simple expression. My first online teacher actually now is the biggest YouTuber in learning English history. Oh, so Rachel's English, like she was your actual. I assume you're talking about Rachel's English. She was your actual like direct teacher, like one-on-one, or what? Because if so, that's kind of cool. I meant it that way. I talked to his a lot. Wait, what? What are we talking about? Him a lot, I guess. Anyway, the sussiest. Kind of like no. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, whatever. Oh, I see. That was referring to talk to him a lot, to God. Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. Oh, I see. Well, I guess it works then. The standard phrase is to like just thank God. But because his English is good. I'm getting so lost now. You were 14 in 2003. Yes, I was 14 in 2003. I graduated in 2007. So, yeah, I'm old. I mean, Tamo is different from Tequino. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah. I don't know if he can fool a native. He's not a native speaker. And who might that YouTuber be, if you don't mind me asking? Koreans. Ooh, new person. New person joins the chat. Koreans learn American English, but I am embased. TOEIC test Australian English native pronunciation. Yes, we Korean used to learn it all. Used to learn it all. Okay, embased. Is that a word? Oof, dropping messed up. Yeah, I did a search for it and it comes up as embarrassed, which is what I was thinking it's supposed to be. Is embased a word? There's a Reddit entry. Okay. Well, if that's a word, I don't know it. Interesting, yeah. That's cool. American English. What? Is that the channel? The website. Z American English. I see. Wow, he has 8.7 million subscribers. So he's bigger than Rachel's English. Well, I mean, there are a lot of Arabic speakers, and I'm sure a lot of you are learning English. So I guess that makes sense. Jeez. I didn't think there was any English teaching channel that big. That's amazing. Alrighty. Who am I compared to a native? But anyways, I understand you pretty well. But as in Obidos, yeah, I'm not going to be able to say that, right? We don't speak English. It gets a little bit harder to speak. Yeah. Platonic. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. There's no way that was not a troll. Yeah, I know. That guy I was talking about. You're pronouncing your language wrong. Here's how the boss says, I know. And he kept commenting on my videos, and I was just like, at first I was just like, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, but it was very clear he was trolling. And I even specifically said, I was like, hey, like, I don't appreciate trolls. Like, I will like ban you. And he even threatened me. He was like, oh, you dare to ban me? Like, I have friends. And, but I don't remember how he phrased it, but he was implying like he was going to like hack me or something. And I was just like, okay. And I just like banned him. So I don't think he can fool a native. First 5 seconds, I couldn't tell he's not a native. That said, those pronunciations really good. I have an American accent when I speak Portuguese. I get bullied because of it. Am I crazy for that? Wow. People are horrible. It's the human brain. We're wired for connection, and anything that stands out, like, nope, you're not part of us. And it's ridiculous. I mean, you're not crazy, no. But those people are probably crazy. Now, I myself had a very slight American coloring to my Portuguese after spending 2 years home only using Portuguese to talk to my parents occasionally. As I said, we can't tell because we aren't native speakers after all, but after going to school for some months, back to normal. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm like a whole hour over time, guys. I really need to go. We're kind of just like chatting at this point. I want to hear this Z American guy really quick, like actually speaking English. Are there any videos where he's like actually like, not just like, this is a sentence, but like he's actually speaking English? I'm a native Russian speaker. Hey, a new person. Welcome, new person, YouTube user. Native Russian speaker and nasality is something I struggle with for the life of me. Any tips on that? Meaning like being too nasal or not being able to use nasality correctly. I assume it's too nasal. I think, is it phase 1 or phase 0? I forget which lesson it's in, but in either the phase 0 or phase 1 lesson for mouth posture, I do go over a basic exercise to try to get control over the velum, the nasal flap that opens and closes to let it go through the nose. You can try that, but you have to, you just kind of have to play with it and get used to, like, right? So if, say, for example, I want to sound really nasally. Okay, so what I'm doing right now, there's still some sound that's coming through my mouth, but I'm trying to let that flap be very open. So a lot of sound is coming through my nose. Okay. Now, if I try to completely 100% make it only go through my mouth, this is what it sounds like. I completely closed the nasal flap. I sealed it with a little vacuum, and now it's all going through my mouth. Now, this kind of sounds a little bit like I have a cold or something, like my nose is stuffy. Because in actual real speech, that nasal flap is going to be open a little bit at least. So a little bit of sound it naturally goes through the nose, and that's okay. Um, and then when we do it goes fully through the nose because the lips are closed. If we do this blocks the airflow and it fully goes through the nose. If we do in the back, that blocks the airflow and it goes fully through the nose. Those are the nasal consonants. But through the general flow of your speech, you just want that nasal flap to kind of be mostly closed, to just kind of roughly relaxed. To you, if you're too nasal, which this happens for some speakers and or some languages, like Portuguese and French tend to be more nasal. So speakers of those languages might have a bit of a problem. But if you're too nasal, it means your nasal flap, the velum back there, is too loose. It's too relaxed. So you need to practice closing it, figuring out how to direct more of that sound through the mouth. And you can only do that through playing with it and exploring it and just like paying attention, trying to make little changes. It's probably going to be very difficult at first. But that's how you do it. You just have to get control over that part of your vocal tract. So it is what it is. I see Russian. I don't speak Russian, but apparently you are responding to a YouTube user who is a Russian speaker. So thank you. um, watch his last video. Yeah. No, my last video was on partial nasality of vowels. That's a special in between thing where you really need to have good control over the nasal flap. Because if you make it too nasally, it's not going to sound good. And the partial nasality is not necessarily required, but it is a very, very, very common thing we do. Wow, that spells Sergey. God, Cyrillic is crazy. I'm a non-native too, but I can tell. Oh, I did that. Accurate whether someone's non-native or not. Yeah, you could develop that ability. So, but wait, for what? Who's a native, non-native? I don't know if there's a video link somewhere that I missed because it doesn't show it. So what are we waiting for my opinion on? Happens after tons and tons of input, and when you're actually aware of phonological system. Yeah, probably. Trying to follow the thread back. I don't think you can pull a native. Abdullah, he's not a native speaker. I don't know if he can pull a native. His English is good. Oh, I see. Okay, so that goes all the way back to that. Yeah. Well, I figured that much. He sounds good to me. Well, that's what I was saying. Like, I want to hear him actually speak English. Let me see if I can find a spot where he's speaking English. Lots of Arabic, lots of Arabic. Videos. Okay. Okay. His last video. His last video. I see. Okay. He sounds quite fantastic. I can immediately tell that he's not a native. I would definitely not be able to tell where he's from, like, at all. And the biggest part that stands out to me is his flow. He seems to kind of, and this is a super, super, super common problem that a lot of English learners have, and I don't see it addressed enough, if at all, which is that because when we tend to like learn how to speak and we learn words and grammar and stuff, we're so focused on like, okay, put this word next to this word, next to this word, next to this word. And then when you get used to speaking, you'll have a decent flow, but there's like these little tiny micro spaces between the words. So instead of saying um, like I see him here, he says like, I'll be doing my homework at 8 p.m. I'll be doing my homework at 8 p.m. I'll be doing my homework at 8 p.m. Okay. An English learner who has a decent flow might say it like, I'll be doing my homework at 8 p.m. I'll be doing my homework at 8 p.m. And it's like the rhythm's a little off. There's like these little micro pauses between the words. And you might even be using the linking, a lot of the linking properly, but you don't have like a smoothened flow that just like comes out with like everything is like one thought. It's still like, it still seems like a bunch of words put together. Um, and he definitely, I think that's probably his biggest weakness. There's a couple sounds here and there where I'm like, it could be improved, but I think that's the biggest thing that stands out to me. He needs to work on that. Which he again, even that is pretty good, but he's suffering from that a bit. I think that's probably his biggest weakness. That's definitely somebody that like if I were an Arabic speaker learning English, or I guess just anybody learning English and using his English content, I think he has a solid enough level that I wouldn't use him as like shadowing practice. I wouldn't mimic him necessarily. But clearly he has done a lot of good work and will probably know what he's talking about, for at least for most things. So he's probably a pretty good resource, I think, as a non-native teacher. There's probably a chance he's even better than some native teachers. Not in terms of natural sound, but in terms of probably the teaching and what he talks about. I know how the language works, how it sounds. Change some things here and there. Oh, okay. Yeah, that can happen. That's just because you haven't built up, like your automaticity and your accuracy aren't at the same level. So it's just more practice. Does he make YouTube shorts? Yes, his accent is really good, but he sounds foreign. Yes, that's on I watch. Just checked. So more open is less nasality. No, I know this always confuses people. Okay, think about this, right? So you have this flap in the back. Okay, usually it's just like slightly open. Okay, now if it's closed, right, this is the gate to your nose. So if you close the door to the nose, the sound can only go through your mouth. Okay, so then you could say, okay, the mouth is open, the nose is closed. Now, if I start trying to speak more like this and try to make everything really, really, really nasally through my nose, okay, now it's like, I mean, there's still going to be a little coming through the mouth, but now it's like that door is completely open and it's going more through the nose. When I do an that flap has to be open so that the sound can go through the nose. So more open is more nasal, right? Because if I try to close it and I do an M, there's nowhere for the sound to go. It comes into my mouth and it gets stuck behind the lips. Okay, but if it's open, now it can go through the nose. So more open is more nasality. He said he's doing this because his channel is for learners. It's like the slow down version. Even then, like when I slow things down for you guys, which I mean, I generally talk pretty normally, but when I'm making my lessons, I try to be conscious. Like I want as many people as possible, but there's a certain threshold of skill you need to follow my lessons, listening skill. But like say for example, okay, I'll use this. So the first thing he says in this lesson, okay, so he says like, "Hey there, folks, how are you?" Okay, now, "Hey there, folks, how are you?" "Hey there, folks, how are you?" Okay, he does that pretty well. We're continuing our conversation. That's kind of like how he said it. We are continuing our conversation. Okay, we're continuing our conversation. That's native. We're continuing our conversation. So just because I slow it down doesn't mean that I break it up. Okay, I still keep that flow. Now, if I want to make it really clear for like the lowest possible level of learner, then I might say something like, we are continuing our conversation, but then those spaces are probably going to be very well defined instead of just like little micro spaces like he's using. So even if he's doing it to be slower and clearer to more people, it still shows a weakness. It's not the way that it would flow out from a native. Is Adara a native English speaker? No, she's a Hebrew speaker. She is quite amazing. She has a very, very, very good sound. If I listen to her very closely for an extensive period, I can tell a little thing here and there. And actually, what I'm probably noticing, because I think she learned sort of like the standard neutral that they usually teach. I think any differences that I notice are probably more from that. Like I don't think she ever really sounds unnatural. I could be wrong about it. I'd have to listen again, but she's super, 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 super high level. Definitely deserves any praise she gets. And that's Hadar is a teacher that, like I think you can trust what she says for the most part. Of course, I disagree with some things that some teachers say, of course. So I probably wouldn't say everything, but generally speaking, yes, she's up there. I don't dare to pronounce words I don't know the pronunciation, and normally don't care about my grammar mistakes. Especially after I learned AAVE. Should I keep myself on this boat or should I leave? I mean, is it like that a native sound native, considering that fact English is a international language? It has a bunch of accents. It depends on your goals. Everything depends on your goals. Okay. There are people who have horrible pronunciation, but not so horrible that we can't understand them. It's just, in terms of English, like clearly you have like a very thick accent, right? So there are people who have a very thick accent who have broken grammar and who know relatively few words, but they're able to communicate very effectively. Okay, because their pronunciation is good enough where it matters, their grammar is good enough where it matters, and they know enough words to sort of talk around what they need to talk around. And they get it done and they can communicate. Okay. At the end of the day, language is communication. If your goal is just to be able to communicate, okay, little pronunciation work to maybe help us understand you better, a little bit of grammar to make sure that you're not completely breaking the language and we can't understand you. That's really all you need. The opposite end of that would be native-like. No mistakes, pronunciation is on point, grammar's on point. Okay. And you could be anywhere in between. So it depends on your goal. Okay. If your goal is just to be understood, sounds like you probably don't have much to worry about. Now, I haven't heard you. I don't know. I maybe if I heard you, I would be like, I can't really understand anything you're saying. In which case, yeah, you need to work on some things. You can't just like break whatever grammar you want and say things however you want. It doesn't quite work that way. But provided that your pronunciation is decent enough, and your grammar is understandable enough, then that's all you need. So yeah. So what I would say then is, when you try to speak to an English speaker, if they understand you with little to no problem and you're happy with that, you're good. Don't worry about it. But if you try to speak to an English speaker, I mean like a native English speaker, and they have difficulty following you, understanding you, they have to keep asking like, okay, wait, what? Say that again. Or they just kind of generally seem confused or having a hard time listening to you, then you have some stuff to work on, whether grammar and or pronunciation. So anyway, I'm definitely going to go. I'm way over time. I need to eat something. I'm very hungry. I haven't eaten anything today. I don't know if you can hear my stomach. But okay, so thank you guys for coming and hanging out and asking questions. This is going to be one of the longer live streams, just about 4 hours. I can't be doing this anymore, guys. I don't have time. But hopefully I was able to help you guys out. Coming up, I'm still answering questions. If you have more questions that you want to leave in comments that I can make videos about, I can do that. But I have more questions that I'm answering in video format. What else did you do? More minimal pairs, PB, Kaga, those are coming up. And the range concept essentials lesson. So over the course of this next week, that's more or less what you can expect. And then I still have lots of minimal pair and extra practice lessons to make, but as far as main content goes, like actual solid lessons, I'm kind of out. So I think I'm going to be switching out of pronunciation a bit and more into other areas like grammar. So yay. Because I know some of you are really waiting for that. But all right, have a great week, everybody, and I will see you next time. It's been a blessing hanging out with you. Bon appetit. Yeah. Very nice of your day. Well, thank you. Yes. And glad it was a good time. So thank you, Delio, and everybody else. See you guys next time. Oh, I be talking about that like a broken record. Yeah, IB, that's definitely AAV. Before, when I don't know AAV and I thought I didn't know anything, I spoke just the standard. Okay, yeah. The only thing about AAVE is for a standard American general English speaker, standard general American English speaker, AAVE sounds very informal and often uneducated. Now, I'm not judging it. It is what it is. I like it myself. I like how it sounds. It's pretty interesting. But that's the perception that most speakers will have. So if you don't want that perception, then you need to not use AAVE. Just so you're aware of that. But you can definitely communicate just fine with it. And if that's what you want, that's not a problem. So yeah. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to go. So see you guys next time.